My name is Emily, and at 43 years old, I find myself navigating life's twists and turns alone. 2 years ago, my husband John, who was my age, was taken by a sudden heart attack. His absence left a void that seemed insurmountable. We had hoped for children, but fate had different plans, leaving us in a silent ache of unfulfilled dreams. Guilt often washed over me, knowing John's deep longing for fatherhood. Yet in his wisdom, he reassured me, our happiness doesn't depend on children. It's in cherishing each other, just the two of us. We held on to those words tightly, crafting moments of joy amidst our shared sorrow. But life's capriciousness had another chapter in store for me. In a cruel twist, just as we found solace in each other's company, I found myself grappling with the stark loneliness of his absence. In this unforgiving reality, circumstances led me to reside alone under the same roof as my late husband's mother, a woman with whom I frequently found myself at odds. Our living arrangement became the result of John's parents' divorce, with his father now a presence in our shared dwelling, a two-family abode offering the only solace in an otherwise strained situation. Yet, as time passed, my mother-in-law's visits grew more frequent, perhaps driven by a longing for her departed son. I couldn't help but feel apprehensive. Her demeanor was often overbearing, punctuated by subtle jabs. "What exactly do you mean by that?" I would inquire, bracing for the inevitable sting of her words. "It's because he ended up with someone like you that John's no longer with us. You bear some responsibility," she would assert, her accusations as sharp as ever. Her reproaches were nothing new, but each time they cut deeper. "Are you seriously suggesting that I'm to blame?" I challenged, grappling with the weight of her accusations. "Perhaps he fell ill because you couldn't manage his diet properly. I suspect your cooking was too rich. His weight gain after marriage speaks volumes," my mother-in-law asserted, her words like barbs aimed directly at my heart. While it was true that John had put on weight since our wedding day, he always praised my cooking and savored each meal with genuine delight. His kindness knew no bounds. Even if the food had been supper, he'd have eaten it without complaint. "If only you had been more vigilant about his health, this tragedy could have been avoided," she continued, her tone heavy with accusation. These words, delivered by my mother-in-law in the somber days before John's funeral 2 years ago, struck me like a thunderbolt. Blaming me for John's illness and passing was a cruel twist of fate, one that left me reeling with pain. Though I knew the accusations were unfounded, the constant repetition took a toll on my psyche, making an already difficult time nearly unbearable. For my mother-in-law, Joe must have been the center of her universe. The abrupt and untimely loss of her beloved son must have been excruciating. I could empathize with her struggle to contain her emotions. However, her attacks on me intensified with each passing day, a development I had sadly anticipated. "Because of you, my precious son is gone. Were you plotting to inherit his insurance money all along?" she accused, her words cutting like daggers. How many times must I deny such baseless accusations? "It's simply not true," I retorted, trying to maintain my composure. "You deliberately avoided having children just to claim his insurance money, didn't you? You're a devious woman," she spat venomously. As a couple, we longed for children and pursued every avenue, including medical assistance. But despite our efforts, we were unable to conceive. "The notion of profiting from insurance is ludicrous," I explained, my patience wearing thin. "Do you honestly believe I would fall for such a charade?" she scoffed, her disbelief palpable. "Each day without John is a torment for me. I can't pretend to be anything other than what I am," I replied, my voice tinged with sorrow. "Why do you utter such cruelty? It would have been better if you had never been part of our lives. Why did Joe have to endure this? Your words are unbearable. I can't bear the thought of never seeing my son again," she lamented, her anguish pouring out in waves. "What would John think if he heard you now? Pointing fingers won't bring him back. Joe was a remarkable and hardworking son. His loss is incomprehensible. It would have been easier if you were here. There's a line you don't cross. Some things are better left unsaid." Oh, I'm just talking to myself, voicing thoughts that have been haunting me. "It's nothing you need to concern yourself with. What's your ultimate point? Leave? And why should I leave? Your presence is suffocating. I won't demand it today, but please vacate this house at the earliest. Since John's passing, ownership rightfully belongs to me. After John's passing, you've probably got your eye on the insurance money and the house, haven't you?" she accused, her tone heavy with suspicion. You're making wild assumptions. I wasn't even aware of any insurance payout until after he passed. I defended myself, feeling the weight of her distrust bearing down on me. Her discovery of the insurance payout seemed to fuel her suspicions, as if she believed I had orchestrated John's death to secure the house and money. No matter how hard I tried to reason with her, she remained steadfast in her mistrust. I felt like I was reaching my breaking point. Living under the same roof was becoming unbearable, each day more mentally draining than the last. The next day, the tension boiled over. You must be living the high life now. No need to worry about work with all that insurance money rolling in. Is that why you're here, to rub it in? She sneered, her words laced with bitterness. It's not fair to twist my words like that. I can't take these constant jabs. I understand you're grieving for John, but it's not right to lash out at me. I miss him just as much and feel the ache of his absence every day, I replied, trying to maintain my composure amidst the storm of accusations. Seriously, spare me the act. You've got it made with the house and money, don't you? Playing the devoted wife role, I see, she sneered, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I won't entertain such accusations. We face our own struggles, particularly with not having children, but I loved John deeply and envisioned a future filled with cherished moments together, I countered, trying to hold onto my dignity amidst her onslaught. It's astounding how you can speak so freely with everything falling into place for you. Must be nice having life handed to you on a silver platter, she retorted, her words cutting deep. That's a heartless thing to say. If I could trade the money and the house just to have John back, I'd do it without a second thought, I confess, my voice tinged with sorrow. Ah, so you're implying you don't need the insurance money then? She pressed, a hint of skepticism in her tone. Why would you even suggest such a thing? Just because I don't need it doesn't mean I'll refuse it. This money represents John's last gesture of love and concern for my future without him. I intend to honor that sentiment, I replied firmly, determined not to let her diminish the significance of John's final gift to me. You have no shame, she spat, her disdain evident in her tone. Feeling the strain of our cohabitation weighing heavily upon us both, I summoned the courage to broach a topic that had been weighing on my mind. Can we put an end to this arrangement? I proposed, hoping for a resolution to our ongoing conflict. What do you mean? She inquired, her tone wary. We argue every day, and it's taking a toll on both of us. I believe it's in our best interest to part ways, I explained, bracing myself for her response. That sounds like the most sensible option. Please make arrangements to vacate the premises soon, she replied, her words tinged with finality. It's you who should be leaving. This house belongs to me, I countered, feeling a surge of indignation. I can't believe you're trying to evict me. You're even more heartless than I thought. The house is too large for me alone. I'm contemplating selling it and settling elsewhere. Besides, properties in this area fetch a good price, I declared, determined to assert my own interests in the face of her hostility. Seems like every conversation with you circles back to money. How much is enough for you? If you're considering selling, why not just hand the house over to me? It'll be too much for you to manage alone, and the expenses, like property taxes, could become overwhelming. I could help you find a more suitable living situation, like an apartment. Are you suggesting I pay rent to stay in my own home? If selling is your plan, then consider handing it over to me. Renting an apartment would likely be more economical than maintaining this entire house. I can't commit to monthly rent payments, but I'm willing to contribute towards it. If that's the arrangement, so be it. I'm relieved to finally break free from living under the same roof with you. I always feared it would come to this. Just promise me you'll provide financial support. Agreed. Let's start the search for an apartment soon. So, we made the decision to go our separate ways. Despite our complicated relationship, my mother-in-law is the mother of my late husband, John. I feel a duty to support her, especially considering her financial struggles. With this in mind, I began the search for a suitable apartment for her. I feel like I've let you down. The diagnosis was a cerebral hemorrhage, but thankfully, it wasn't life-threatening. I spent 2 months in the hospital, including my recovery time. Throughout my stay, my mother-in-law never once came to visit. It was my parents and sister who took turns caring for me. Their unwavering support allowed me to regain almost normalcy in my daily life, with only minor lingering symptoms. And before I knew it, my 2-month hospital stay had passed, and the day of my discharge had arrived. I had initially planned to temporarily stay at my parents' place, but upon returning home to gather my belongings, I was greeted by a startling sight. What? Where's the house? What happened? I exclaimed, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My mother-in-law appeared as though she had been expecting me. Congratulations on being discharged. I didn't expect you to look so well. It seems there are minimal lingering effects and I can resume my usual routine. I'm relieved to hear that you're doing better. But what happened to the house while I was in the hospital? I inquired, my mind reeling with questions. Well, you see, I sold it for around $150,000, she replied matter-of-factly. What do you mean you sold it without consulting me? I demanded, incredulous. I had a friend who was eager to live in this area. Her husband works nearby, and they needed a place urgently, so I went ahead and sold it, she explained casually. Selling it without even informing me is completely unacceptable, I protested, feeling a surge of anger. It's not that big of a deal. I received an offer right after you were hospitalized. I figured even if you recovered, you might struggle to live independently and could end up in a care facility, so I made the decision on my own. Don't be upset, she said, trying to justify her actions. I can't believe this. Thanks to me finding a buyer, we got $150,000 from selling the house, she added, as though it were a positive outcome. I can't believe it. While I was in the hospital, my mother-in-law sold the house without consulting me. Apparently, their acquaintance had always coveted the land surrounding my house, and my mother-in-law took it upon herself to arrange a private sale, I recounted, feeling a mix of shock and betrayal. Are you seriously considering selling someone's house without their consent and pocketing the proceeds? I questioned, appalled by her audacity. But the house was originally in John's name, wasn't it? She countered, attempting to justify her actions. While that may be true, I fail to see how that concerns you, I replied, growing increasingly frustrated. Anything that belonged to my son John is rightfully mine, she asserted, her tone unyielding. You seem to conveniently interpret things in your favor, but that's not how ownership works, I retorted, feeling exasperated. What exactly are you implying? She challenged. When John passed away, the title of the house transferred to my name, I explained, hoping to clarify the situation. And what's your point? She asked, seemingly unfazed. Selling a house without the owner's consent is bordering on criminal behavior, I stated firmly, unable to hide my disbelief. Please refrain from calling me a criminal, she snapped defensively. Who would have thought you'd consider life as usual after hearing about the cerebral hemorrhage? That doesn't give you the right to sell it, I argued, struggling to contain my frustration. Why the hostile expression? Do you honestly believe you'd win in court? How about we split it 50-50? That way, we each get $75,000, she suggested nonchalantly. It's not about the money, I snapped, feeling my anger rising. Then why are you so upset? While I was hospitalized, she single-handedly sold her house and used the proceeds to purchase a condo for herself. Strangely enough, there was a condo neighboring our old house for sale at around $75,000, and she's currently residing there. To top it off, she relocated my belongings to her new place. It seems that during those 2 months of my hospitalization, she doubted the severity of my condition and took it upon herself to make significant decisions. It was time to confront the self-centered woman with the truth. The house is no longer in my name, I revealed, my voice tinged with resignation. What do you mean? I demanded, struggling to comprehend her actions. I started the process of selling the house while I was in the hospital, she confessed. And what of it? I pressed, my frustration mounting. Due to its prime location, the sale was swiftly arranged. I was meant to handle the paperwork post-discharge, but it's already been finalized, so there's no turning back, she explained matter-of-factly. You must cancel it immediately, I insisted, feeling the surge of urgency. It's my property, so I see no reason to cancel, she countered, her tone firm. You need to explain the situation to your acquaintance and return the $150,000. I urged, hoping she would see reason. What are you suggesting? I've already purchased a condo, she revealed, her response leaving me speechless. So you're only willing to return half of it? I asked, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. Then you'll need to sell the apartment you're currently residing in to repay the remaining sum, won't you? I pressed, determined to find a solution. My clients are also considering demolishing the house, so it's convenient for them. I need to proceed with the necessary procedures, so please arrange for the refund promptly, she insisted, her tone resolute. Wait a minute. We're not finished discussing this, I interjected, feeling a sense of urgency. I'm considering returning to my parents' home, so I'd appreciate it if you could arrange to have my belongings sent there, I requested, hoping for some semblance of cooperation. Wait, I have a feeling today will be the last time we see each other. Please take care, she said, her words tinged with finality, leaving me with a sense of resignation. After that incident, I severed all ties with her. Later, I heard she apologized to the acquaintance she had sold the house to without my consent and reimbursed them. The total expenses, including demolition and inconvenience fees, amounted to roughly $170,000. Additionally, despite selling her apartment, its value had decreased since her purchase, leaving her with substantial debt. On the other hand, thanks to her actions, I saved on demolition costs and made a significant profit from selling my house. A new home was constructed on the land where John and I had once lived. Seeing the new house brought back memories of the happy times we shared, evoking both nostalgia and sadness. Despite my reservations, I decided to visit the site. To my surprise, someone I never wished to see again appeared. "Well, it's been some time, hasn't it?" she greeted me. "Why are you here, mother-in-law?" I asked, taken aback by her unexpected presence. "I'm heading to work," she replied casually. "You're going to work now?" I questioned, surprised by her response. "Yes," she affirmed. "So you've started working?" I inquired, puzzled by this newfound revelation. "I'm drowning in debt because of you," I accused. "How can you say that? I'm not responsible for your financial troubles," she retorted defensively. "What happened to the assistance you promised with my apartment?" I pressed. "Our relationship has ended, so any previous agreements are null and void," she replied coldly. "John would be devastated by all of this. I would tell him the same," I stated, my voice tinged with sadness. "What do you mean?" she inquired, her tone softening slightly. "John always prioritized me and treated me with kindness. He was considerate, wasn't he?" I reminisced. "What's your point?" she asked, sensing where the conversation was heading. "You used to blame me every day, saying that John's death was my fault," I reminded her. "And it's the truth. How do you think John would feel if he knew?" She fired back. "Mother-in-law, if it weren't for John, you would be in a much worse situation," I pointed out. "Are you still going to insist on that? Will it change anything?" she challenged, her tone bitter with resentment. "I have no interest in being lectured by you. With all the money you now have, you should take on some of the debt burden. After all, we're still family, aren't we?" she retorted, her tone tinged with bitterness. "I never truly cared for you, but I intended to support you because you're John's beloved mother," I confessed. "Well, that's the least you can do," she replied, her voice laced with expectation. "However, I can't overlook some of the hurtful things you've said and done since my stroke. I can't simply forget the pain caused by your words," I admitted, feeling the weight of unresolved grievances. "That was months ago. It's time to let go of grudges," she insisted, brushing off my concerns. "It's not easy for the person who was wounded by those words to simply move on," I countered, my frustration mounting. "You're quite stubborn, aren't you? Call it what you want," she dismissed, showing no remorse. "I'm no longer involved. By the way, shouldn't you be at work by now?" I redirected the conversation, eager to end the confrontation. "Ah, look at the time. Take care on your way," she responded, avoiding the topic. "If it weren't for you, I'd be enjoying a peaceful retirement," I remarked bitterly. "It sounds like you regret your decisions. Instead of blaming others, perhaps it's time to reflect on your own actions," she suggested, deflecting any responsibility. After expressing my thoughts to her, I walked away from the confrontation. I recounted. "It's only been 2 years since John passed away. Thanks to the financial security he left behind, I've been able to build a stable life. His legacy means everything to me, and I'm determined to honor it wisely. I've invested in an apartment close to my parents' home where I now reside alone. Though I long for John's presence, I take solace in the belief that he watches over me from above. My aim is to lead a long, fulfilling life, cherishing the memories we shared and living for both of us. My ultimate dream is to one day reunite with him in heaven, where we can relive our cherished moments together."
My name's Robin, and I had just celebrated my 26th birthday a few weeks ago. Life was good. I was engaged to Jake, my college sweetheart, and our wedding was right around the corner. Everything seemed perfect until my mom decided to throw a wrench in the works. I was lounging on the couch, flipping through a bridal magazine when my phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I answered with a cheerful, "Hey, Mom, what's up?" "Robin, honey, I need your opinion," she said, her voice laced with excitement. "What kind of suit do you think would look best on Tom when he walks you down the aisle?" "I'm thinking maybe blue, but maybe black is more traditional?" I blinked, confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Grandpa's walking me down the aisle." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "What?" "No, Tom's doing it. He's got a teenage daughter, and he wants to practice. You know, to get a feel for when it's her turn." I sat up straight, my magazine forgotten. "Practice? Mom, I'm not some dress rehearsal for your boyfriend's future father of the bride moment. Grandpa's walking me down the aisle, end of story." "But Tom." "I don't care about Tom," I shouted, surprising myself with the intensity of my anger. "I'm not going to be his guinea pig. If he wants to practice so badly, tell him to find some other wedding to crash." "Robin Elizabeth Carter, you listen to me." I hung up. The phone immediately started ringing again, but I ignored it, tossing it aside as if it had burned me. As I sat there, my heart pounding, memories started flooding back. Dad's face, his warm smile, the way he used to swing me around in the backyard. He'd died when I was 10, leaving a gaping hole in our lives that Mom had desperately tried to fill. I remembered the parade of men that followed, all truckers from the transportation company where Mom worked. She'd bring them home, introducing each one as the one, her future husband, my future stepfather. But they never lasted long. Mom was intense, clingy. She'd scare them off, and then the next one would appear, another Mr. Right in a never-ending cycle. As I sat there, lost in memories, I couldn't help but remember how I'd sought refuge with my grandparents during those tumultuous years. They were my safe haven, a stark contrast to the chaos at home. I was about 13 when things really started to get out of hand. One day, I came home from school to find Mom in a screaming match with some woman I'd never seen before. "You home-wrecking bitch," the stranger shrieked, her face red with fury. "That's my husband." Mom, never one to back down, fired right back. "He told me he was single. Don't blame me for your marital problems." And there, lounging in our ratty armchair, was Mom's latest boyfriend. I think his name was Dave or Dan. I honestly couldn't keep track anymore. He was watching the two women fight with a smug grin on his face, like it was some kind of twisted entertainment. I stood frozen in the doorway, my backpack slipping off my shoulder. "Mom?" I called out weakly. Both women whirled to face me. The stranger's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Is this your daughter?" she spat at Mom. "Does she know what kind of woman her mother is?" "Leave her out of this," Mom yelled back. Dave Ordand finally stood up. Ladies, he drawled. "No need to fight. There's plenty of me to go around." The stranger let out a strangled scream and lunged at him. I took that as my cue to bolt, locking myself in my room until the shouting stopped. That night, I heard Mom crying through the thin walls of our apartment. Dave Ordan had left with his wife, and Mom was alone again. As I grew older, things didn't get better. By the time I was 15, I was doing everything I could to avoid being home. It wasn't just the revolving door of Mom's boyfriends anymore, it was the way they looked at me. I remember one guy, Rick, eyeing me up and down as I grabbed a snack from the kitchen. "Your girl's filling out nicely," he told Mom. Mom just laughed. "She takes after me," she said proudly, completely oblivious to how uncomfortable I was. I started spending more time at the library, at friends' houses, anywhere but home. But Mom didn't get it. She'd call me selfish for not wanting to hang out with her and her latest flame. "Robin, honey," she said one day, "come meet Jeff. He's great with kids. We could be such a happy family, the three of us." I looked at Jeff, saw the way his eyes roved over me, and felt sick. "No thanks," I muttered, retreating to my room. That night, I called my grandpa. "Can I come stay with you for a while?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Of course, sweet pea," he said without hesitation. "You're always welcome here." It didn't take long for my grandparents to notice something was wrong. One evening, as we sat around their kitchen table, the words just tumbled out of me. I told them everything, the parade of men, the uncomfortable stares, Mom's obliviousness to it all. By the time I finished, Grandma had tears in her eyes, and Grandpa's face was set in a hard line I'd never seen before. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and firm. "We're putting a stop to this right now." The next day, we drove to Mom's place. Grandpa didn't waste any time. "Carol, what you're doing is immoral and dangerous. You're bringing strange men into your home with a young girl present. Do you have any idea what could happen?" Mom's face flushed red. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "You've never wanted me to be happy. You're trying to ruin my life." "Your life?" Grandpa shot back. "What about Robin's life? What about her safety?" "Robin's fine," Mom insisted. "She's just being dramatic." "So what, you're going to take her away from me, is that it?" Grandpa nodded. "Robin's coming to live with us. You can sort out your personal life without putting her at risk." "Fine," Mom spat. "Take her. It'll be easier to find a good man without a teenager cramping my style anyway." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd known, deep down, that Mom saw me as a burden sometimes, but hearing her say it out loud, it hurt more than I'd expected. Grandma squeezed my shoulder. "Go pack your things, sweetie," she said softly. I nodded, heading to my room in a daze. As I threw clothes into a duffel bag, I could hear Mom and Grandpa still arguing in the living room. When I came back out, Mom was standing by the door, arms crossed. "So this is it, huh?" she said. "You're choosing them over me?" I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. She seemed smaller somehow, more fragile. For a moment, I saw the scared, lonely woman behind the brash exterior. "I'm choosing me, Mom," I said quietly. "I hope someday you'll understand that." She didn't answer, just turned away as I walked out the door with my grandparents. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. Living with my grandparents was like stepping into a different world. Gone were the late-night arguments, the parade of strange men, and the constant tension. Instead, I found myself surrounded by love, stability, and support. I still went to the same school, saw the same friends. But everything felt different. Better. I could focus on my studies without worrying about what, or who, I'd find when I got home. Mom was Mom. She'd call occasionally, usually to talk about her latest boyfriend or to complain about work. She rarely asked about me, and when she did, she didn't seem to really listen to the answers. When graduation day rolled around, I was surprised to see her there. She sat with my grandparents, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "You look nice, honey," she said after the ceremony, giving me a quick hug. "Listen, I've got to run. I've got a date with this great guy I met at work. You understand, right?" And just like that, she was gone. I watched her rush off, feeling a mixture of hurt and relief. My grandparents helped me move into my dorm room that fall, setting me up with everything I needed for college. I decided to study to become an investment manager, fascinated by the world of finance and planning. That's where I met Jake. We were in the same introduction to financial markets class, both of us bright-eyed freshmen with big dreams. We became friends first, study buddies who'd quiz each other late into the night at the campus coffee shop. It wasn't until our senior year that things shifted. We were working on a group project, hunched over spreadsheets in the library, when Jake suddenly looked up at me. "Robin," he said, his voice serious, "I think I'm in love with you." I blinked at him, surprised. And then I realized I felt the same way. Our relationship blossomed quickly after that. Jake was kind, smart, and stable, everything I'd never had in my life with Mom. When he proposed after graduation, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I saw Mom a few times during those years, usually when I'd stop by her place during breaks. Her new boyfriend, Tom, was always there, younger than her, with slicked back hair and a cocky grin. "Robin, this is Tom," Mom had said, beaming. "He's got a daughter, 7 years younger than you. Isn't that great?" I'd smiled politely, not sure what to say. Tom had looked me up and down in a way that made me uncomfortable, reminding me of all those boyfriends from years ago. After reliving all these memories, I knew I needed to talk to Grandpa. Jake and I drove out to my grandparents' house one weekend, the weight of Mom's demand heavy on my mind. "Grandpa," I said as we sat in their cozy living room, "Mom called me about the wedding. She wants her boyfriend Tom to walk me down the aisle. Says he wants to practice for when his own daughter gets married." Grandpa reached out and took my hand. "Robin, I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle. But if you wanted to choose Tom or anyone else, I'd understand. It's your day." I shook my head, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "There's no choice to make, Grandpa. It's always been you." Jake, sitting next to me, squeezed my other hand. "I support whatever Robin wants," he said. "She's told me about everything you've done for her, sir. I can't think of anyone better to give her away." Grandpa smiled, his eyes suspiciously moist. "Well then," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "I guess we'd better start practicing our walk, hadn't we?" As we all laughed, I felt a wave of love and gratitude wash over me. This was my real family, the people who'd stood by me, supported me, loved me unconditionally. And in a few short weeks, I'd be adding Jake to that family officially. I thought I'd put an end to Mom's ridiculous demands, but apparently, I'd underestimated her determination. The calls kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. "Robin, you need to reconsider," Mom pleaded one evening. "Tom's really upset. If you don't let him walk you down the aisle, he might leave me." "Then maybe he's not the right guy for you," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "Look, I'm busy planning my wedding. Can we please drop this?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke again, her voice was cold. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, I won't come to your wedding at all." Something inside me snapped. "You know what? Fine. Don't come. It's not like you've been a real mother to me anyway." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking. Part of me felt guilty for lashing out, but a bigger part felt relieved. Like I'd finally said what I'd been holding back for years. Days passed, and I started to think maybe that was the end of it. Maybe Mom had finally gotten the message. I threw myself into wedding planning, grateful for the distraction. But then, about a week later, I was at work when my boss, Mr. Johnson, called me into his office. As soon as I walked in, I knew something was wrong. Mom was there, mascara streaking down her face, with Tom hovering behind her like a bodyguard. "Robin," Mom cried, throwing herself at me. "How could you be so cruel to your own mother?" I stood frozen, completely blindsided. "Mom, what are you doing here?" She turned to Mr. Johnson, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. "Mr. Johnson, you have to talk some sense into her. She's breaking her poor mother's heart." Mr. Johnson stammered, clearly out of his depth. Mom barreled on, gesturing wildly between herself and Tom. "She won't let her parents walk her down the aisle at her wedding. Can you believe it? After everything we've done for her. Please, make her listen to reason." Before anyone could say anything else, Mom grabbed Tom's arm and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Johnson leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Robin, I think you owe me an explanation. What exactly is going on?" Haltingly, I began to explain, about my childhood, about living with my grandparents, about Mom's revolving door of boyfriends. I told him about her insistence that Tom walk me down the aisle, and my refusal. To my surprise, Mr. Johnson's face softened as I spoke. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "You know, Robin, your mother reminds me a lot of my ex-wife," he said, shaking his head. "I divorced her because of similar, dramatic tendencies. Always making everything about her, never considering how her actions affected others." Relief washed over me. "So, you understand?" He nodded. "I do. And I want you to know that I'm on your side here. Your wedding day is about you, not your mother or her boyfriend." I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I really appreciate that." However, he continued, his tone turning serious, "We can't have scenes like this at the office. It's unprofessional and disruptive. I need you to handle this situation, Robin. Make sure it doesn't happen again." As I left Mr. Johnson's office, relief gave way to anger. How dare Mom show up at my workplace like that? She could have cost me my job. My first stop was the security desk. I explained the situation to Dave, the head of security, showing him a picture of Mom and Tom on my phone. "These two are not to be allowed in the building under any circumstances," I said firmly. "If they show up, please call the police immediately." Back at my desk, I opened my email, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I typed out a message to Mom. "Mom, your behavior today was completely unacceptable. You had no right to show up at my workplace and cause a scene. You could have jeopardized my career with your selfish actions. I've tried to be patient with you, tried to explain my feelings, but you refused to listen. So let me be crystal clear, you are no longer invited to my wedding. Neither is Tom. I'm asking you, no, I'm telling you, to stay away from me. Don't call, don't email, don't show up at my work or my home. If you can't respect my boundaries, I'll have no choice but to take legal action. Robin." I hit send before I could second guess myself, then sat back, feeling drained but oddly liberated. That evening, I told Jake what had happened. He wrapped me in a tight hug. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," he said. "But I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." We called my grandparents and Jake's parents, explaining the situation. To my relief, they all supported my decision. As Jake and I went through our wedding guest list that night, crossing off Mom and Tom's names, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Our wedding would be smaller now, but it would be filled with people who truly loved and supported us. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, squeezing my hand. I looked at him, at the love and concern in his eyes, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. "Yeah," I said, squeezing back. "I really am. And I meant it." For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life, setting boundaries, and surrounding myself with people who genuinely cared about me. It wasn't how I'd imagined my wedding planning would go, but somehow, it felt right. The day I'd dreamed of for so long had finally arrived. I stood at the chapel doors, my heart fluttering with excitement. Grandpa, dapper in his tuxedo, squeezed my hand reassuringly. The music swelled, and we took our first step. But before we could even enter the chapel, a shrill voice cut through the air. "Stop right there." Mom came barreling down the aisle, Tom hot on her heels. She jabbed a finger at Grandpa. "You, move aside. Tom's walking Robin down the aisle." I couldn't believe it. After everything, she was still trying to make my wedding about her. "Mom, what are you doing here? You weren't invited. Please leave. Now." Mom's face crumpled, and the waterworks started. I'd seen this act too many times to be fooled. "How can you be so cruel? I raised you. I loved you after your father died." Grandpa, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Carol, that's enough. Everyone here knows the truth about who really raised Robin." I glanced around at our guests. Their faces showed a mix of shock, sympathy, and, was that a hint of amusement? Clearly, Mom's theatrics weren't winning her any fans. Mom must have noticed too, because her tactics suddenly changed. "Fine," she spat. "I don't need you, Robin. I have Tom." He appreciates me, unlike you. You've always been stupid and arrogant. I disown you." Before I could respond, Grandpa cut in, his voice cold. "Well, Carol, if that's how you feel, then I have something to say too. You're no longer welcome in my house, yes, my house. And I'm writing you out of my will." The change in Tom's demeanor was instant and almost comical. He paled, taking a step back from Mom. Carol. Sorry, but I didn't sign up for all this drama. Plus, without the house and inheritance, well, let's just say, I think I'd be better off finding a younger girlfriend. We're done." Mom's face contorted with rage. She let out a wordless scream, grabbing at her hair. "You're all against me. How dare you? I'll show you." Before she could finish her threat, 2 police officers who had been quietly called by one of the guests appeared at her side. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us," one of them said firmly. As they led Mom away, her shouts echoing through the chapel, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and oddly enough, a bit of pity. This was rock bottom for her, and part of me hoped it might finally be the wake-up call she needed. 30 minutes later, after I'd had a chance to touch up my makeup and calm my nerves, I once again stood at the chapel doors with Grandpa. As we walked down the aisle, I saw Jake waiting for me at the altar, his face full of love and concern. Our eyes met, and suddenly, all the drama of the past hour faded away. This was our moment, and nothing, not even my mother's antics, could take that away from us. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with laughter and happy tears. And as Jake and I shared our first kiss as husband and wife, I knew that whatever challenges life threw our way, we'd face them together, surrounded by the love and support of our true family. During the reception, guest after guest approached us, offering words of support and condemning my mother's behavior. "You handled that like a champ, Robin," my college roommate said, hugging me tight. "Your mom's got some nerve," Jake's uncle grumbled. "But you showed her what real class looks like." And as Jake and I drove off to start our honeymoon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The drama with Mom was behind us now. We had a whole new life ahead of us, and I couldn't wait to see what adventures it would bring. It's been a year since the wedding, and life has settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. Jake and I live in a cozy apartment just a stone's throw from our offices. It's not huge, but it's ours, filled with love and laughter. Every morning, we walk to work together, hand in hand, talking about our plans for the future. The house where I grew up, the one Mom used to live in, now provides us with a steady stream of rental income. We've turned it into something positive, using the extra money to save for our future and occasionally splurge on weekend getaways. As for Mom, well, I hear things through the grapevine now and then. Apparently, she's renting a small apartment across town. And true to form, she's on the hunt for her next soulmate. Some things never change, I guess. I haven't spoken to her since the wedding. Sometimes I feel a twinge of guilt about that, but then I remember the years of chaos, the constant drama, the way she tried to hijack one of the most important days of my life. And I know I made the right choice. One sunny Saturday morning, as Jake and I are having breakfast on our tiny balcony, he asks, "Do you ever think about reaching out to your mom?" I take a sip of coffee, considering the question. Sometimes, I admit. But then I remember how peaceful our life is now, how drama-free. And I'm not ready to risk that. Jake nods, understanding. "You know I'll support whatever you decide, right?" I smile, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I know. And that means everything to me." Later that day, we're walking through the park when we pass a mother and daughter having a picnic. They're laughing, heads close together, sharing some private joke. For a moment, I feel a pang of what might have been. But then I think about Grandma and Grandpa, who call every Sunday without fail. I think about Jake's parents, who have embraced me as a daughter. I think about our friends, who rallied around us during the wedding fiasco and have been our rock ever since. I realize that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, who support you, who love you unconditionally. And by that measure, I'm rich beyond my wildest dreams. So, I've always been the weird one in my family. You know, the black sheep and all that. I'm Ella Thompson, 29 years old now, but I felt like I don't fit in for pretty much forever. Growing up, I was the oldest kid of doctors Margaret and Robert Thompson. Yeah, my parents were big shots, but none of that good stuff ever really came my way. Nah, all the perks went to my younger twin brothers, Jack and Oliver. From the second those two popped out, it was like I became invisible to my parents. It started off small, you know? They'd get a bigger piece of cake or a new toy. But as we got older, it got way worse and super obvious. I remember when I turned 10. I'd been dropping hints for ages about this art set I saw in a shop window. Nothing crazy, just a basic kit with some decent paints and brushes. When my birthday rolled around, I was so pumped to open my one present, and what do I find? A freaking math workbook. When I hit my teenage years, the favoritism got even more in your face. Family trips were all about what the boys wanted. If Jack felt like skiing, boom, we're off to the slopes. If Oliver was into surfing that year, hello beach vacation. My ideas? Always got shot down or ignored. College applications. Man, that's a touchy subject. When I was 17, I fell in love with art restoration. I'd hang out at the local museum for hours, bugging the staff with questions about how they fixed up old art. When I brought up studying art restoration in college, you'd think I'd said I wanted to join the circus or something. Art restoration? Mom laughed. Ella, get real. That's not a proper job. Yeah, Ella, Jack butted in with this smug look. Why don't you do something useful, like become a doctor? I'll never forget how proud my parents looked when Jack said that. It was a look I'd never seen them give me. Even though they didn't have my back, I was determined to make it happen. When college acceptance letters started showing up, I was over the moon to find out I'd scored a scholarship to study art restoration. I remember running into the kitchen, waving the letter around like a crazy person. Mom, Dad, I got a scholarship. Mom barely looked up from her medical journal. That's nice, honey. Did you hear the boys got perfect scores on their SATs? The day I left for college was so different from when the twins would leave 2 years later. I packed up my second-hand laptop and thrift store clothes, getting ready to take the bus to my not-so-fancy state school. My parents were too caught up in their work to even give me a ride to the bus station. But there was one person who actually saw me for who I was. My grandma, Elizabeth. She showed up that day, and right before I was about to leave, she pulled me aside. Ella, sweetie, she said, pushing a small envelope into my hand. I'm so proud of you. Don't ever forget that. Inside the envelope was a check, not enough to change my whole life, but enough to make things a bit easier. But more than the money, it was the fact that she actually noticed me that meant everything. So, college was kind of a mixed bag for me. On one hand, I was finally free from always being compared to Jack and Oliver. I could really dive into my studies without feeling like I was in some weird competition for attention. But on the other hand, money was tight. Like, really tight. While I was barely getting by on my scholarship and working part-time jobs, I'd hear about all the fancy stuff my brothers were up to through family calls and social media. Fancy frat parties, spring break trips to crazy places, internships at big-shot hospitals, all paid for by our parents, of course. Time went by, and I threw myself into my studies like crazy. Art restoration became more than just what I wanted to do for a job, it was my escape, my happy place. There was something really satisfying about bringing beauty back to old, forgotten pieces, about showing the hidden potential under layers of neglect and damage. In my last year, I scored an internship at this small but respected museum. It wasn't fancy work, mostly cleaning and organizing stuff, but it was a way in. I was over the moon. When I called home to share the news, my mother's response was exactly what I expected, lukewarm at best. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, sounding distracted. "Did you hear about Jack's research paper? It's being published in a major medical journal." I held back a sigh. "That's great, Mom. Listen, I was thinking of coming home for a weekend soon. Maybe we could. Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea, she cut me off quick. Your father and I are going to be really busy. We're helping the boys with their research papers. You understand, right? As I hung up the phone, I felt that familiar mix of anger and hurt building up in my chest. But this time, there was something else too. A little spark of defiance, of determination. I looked around my tiny dorm room, at the art books piled up on my desk, at the half-finished restoration project taking up most of my floor. This was my world now, one I had built for myself despite everything. Screw them, I muttered to the empty room. I don't need their approval. But even as I said it, a part of me knew it wasn't true. As much as I tried to deny it, a small part of me still wanted my parents to recognize me, still hoped that one day they'd see me for who I really was. So, graduation day came and went without much fuss from my family. My big moment was marked by a quick dinner at some chain restaurant. So, Ella, what's next? Dad asked, barely looking up from his menu. I sat up straight, trying to sound confident. I actually got a job offer, in one of the museums in New York. Dad frowned. I don't know, Ella. New York is expensive. How much does this job pay? I felt my face get hot as I mumbled the not-so-impressive starting salary. The disappointment on their faces was super obvious. The rest of the dinner was a blur of thinly veiled criticism and comparisons to Jack and Oliver's academic awesomeness. As we were leaving the restaurant, Grandma Elizabeth pulled me aside. Don't let them dim your light, my dear, she whispered, pressing a small envelope into my hand. Go to New York. Chase your dreams. Inside the envelope was a check, enough to cover my first month's rent in the city. I hugged her tight, trying not to cry. The next few years were crazy. I threw myself into my work, slowly but surely making a name for myself in the world of art restoration. It was during this time that I met Noah. Noah was a struggling graphic designer with a nice smile and this infectious passion for his work. We clicked right away over our shared love of art and our experiences as underdogs in our fields. After dating for a while, I decided it was time for Noah to meet my family. From the second we sat down, it was clear my parents had other ideas. They bombarded Noah with questions, each one more pointed than the last. So, Noah, Dad started, trying to sound casual but failing, what exactly are your long-term career prospects? Noah shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. Well, I'm building my client base. It takes time, but I'm making progress. Mom jumped in. And your current income? Is it enough to support a family? I felt my face get hot. Mom, that's not. It's okay, Ella, Noah said, squeezing my hand under the table. I'm not where I want to be money-wise yet, Dr. Thompson, but I'm working hard to get there. The interrogation kept going throughout dinner. With each question, I could see Noah's confidence taking a hit, and my own anger rising. As we were leaving, Mom pulled me aside. Ella, honey, I know you think you care for this boy, but you need to be realistic. You've already chosen a challenging career path. Don't make it worse by attaching yourself to someone with no real future. Mom, I hissed, shocked at how blunt she was being. Dad joined in. Your mother's right, Ella. You need to think about your future. This Noah seems nice enough, but is he really good enough for you? You could do so much better. I stood there, speechless, as years of pent-up frustration threatened to explode. How dare they judge Noah? How dare they once again dismiss my choices? So, as Noah and I started planning our wedding, reality hit us hard. Our combined savings were pretty pathetic, barely enough for a simple ceremony. One night, after staring at budget spreadsheets for hours, I decided to bring it up with my parents. Maybe they'd want to chip in. Mom, Dad, I started hesitantly during our weekly phone call. Noah and I have set a date for the wedding. We're trying to keep costs down, but I was wondering if maybe you'd like to help out a little? Even just with the planning? The silence on the other end of the line was so long and awkward. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice cold as ice. "Ella, you're an adult now. If you've chosen to marry this person, then you need to handle the consequences yourself." I hung up feeling like crap, but not really surprised. Once again, Grandma Elizabeth swooped in to save the day. When I told her about the situation, she didn't hesitate to help. "My dear," she said, her voice warm over the phone, "I may not be able to give you the wedding of your dreams, but I want to help make your day special." She sent over some money that, while not a ton, made a huge difference to our plans. The wedding day arrived, and I had this mix of excitement and nerves churning in my stomach. The community center we'd rented was simple, but looked nice, decorated with wildflowers and twinkly lights. Our small group of friends had pitched in, helping with everything from the decorations to the homemade cake. As I walked down the makeshift aisle, Noah's face lit up with a smile that made all the struggle worth it. For a moment, I forgot about everything else, the money stress, my family being jerks, and just soaked in the love radiating from his eyes. The bubble burst as soon as I caught sight of my family. Mom and Dad sat stiffly in the front row, looking bored and disgusted. I overheard Mom muttering to Dad about the tacky decorations and cheap food. Jack and Oliver were even worse, snickering in the corner and constantly on their phones. I tried to ignore them, focusing instead on our vows and the supportive faces of our friends. It wasn't until the next day that I realized just how cruel they could be. I woke up to a ton of notifications on my phone. Jack and Oliver had gone on social media, posting a bunch of unflattering photos from the wedding. "Congrats to our big sis on her special day," read one caption under a blurry photo of Noah and me cutting our homemade cake. "Nothing says true love like a dollar store wedding." Another post showed a picture of the buffet table next to a photo of a fancy meal from some high-end restaurant. Ella's wedding versus our average Tuesday lunch. Guess which one's which? The comments section was a war zone. Some relatives were shocked at the brothers' behavior. "This is completely unacceptable. You should be ashamed of yourselves," wrote Aunt Sarah. But others seemed to think it was funny. Savage but true. "That wedding looked like a homeless convention," commented our cousin Tim. I felt sick reading through the comments. But what really broke my heart was seeing my parents' responses. Instead of telling their sons off, they were actually encouraging them. Mom had commented, "Boys will be boys. It's just a bit of harmless fun." I didn't call them and demand an apology. I just decided to forget about them for a while. So, 6 months after our wedding, it was time for the annual Thompson family reunion. Even though I was worried about it, Noah thought I should go, hoping it might be a chance to clear the air. Man, were we wrong. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I managed to keep it together for the first hour, making polite conversation and avoiding my immediate family as much as I could. But then I overheard Jack bragging about his latest fancy vacation, paid for by our parents, of course. Something inside me just snapped. "Must be nice," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "To have mommy and daddy bankroll your entire life." The room went dead quiet. Jack stared at me, his mouth hanging open. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," I shot back, years of pent-up frustration finally boiling over. "You and Oliver have been handed everything on a silver platter, while I've had to fight for every scrap of recognition or support." Mom stepped forward, her face red with anger. "Now, Ella, you're being ridiculous. We've always treated you children equally." I let out a bitter laugh. "Equally? Are you kidding me? Let's talk about equal, shall we?" I started counting off on my fingers. Private school tuition for the boys, public school for me. Brand new cars for their 16th birthdays, nothing for mine. And let's not forget the crowning achievement, $300,000 for their Ivy League medical educations, while I had to scrape by on scholarships and loans. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, all eyes on our family's dirty laundry being aired so publicly. Mom's voice was ice cold when she spoke. "If you're so obsessed with money, Ella, perhaps you should have married someone rich instead of your poor husband." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Noah, who had been silently supporting me, stiffened beside me. "How dare you?" I hissed, feeling tears in my eyes. "Noah is worth 10 of you. He actually loves me for who I am, not for how I can make him look good to his country club friends." The reunion turned into total chaos. Everyone was throwing accusations, bringing up old grudges, and years of resentment came pouring out. In the middle of all the shouting, a strong voice cut through the noise. "Enough." Everyone turned to see Grandma Elizabeth standing up, her usually kind face looking stern and angry. "I have watched this family tear itself apart for years, and I won't stand for it anymore," she declared. "Margaret, Robert, your treatment of Ella has been shameful. And you boys," she turned to Jack and Oliver, "your cruelty towards your sister is unforgivable." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Mom, never one to back down, spat out, "Mother, you don't understand. Ella has always been difficult, always causing problems." "No, Margaret," Grandma interrupted. "The only problem here is your blatant favoritism and inability to see the damage you've done." I looked around the room, at the shocked faces of my relatives, at my grandmother's resolute stance, at my parents' anger, and my brother's smug expressions. In that moment, something inside me broke and then came back together differently. "I'm done," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm done trying to win your approval, done trying to be part of this toxic family. Noah and I are leaving, and don't bother trying to contact us." The months that followed were tough. Noah was my rock through it all. He held me when the sadness hit, celebrated the small victories, and never once made me feel guilty for the family drama I'd brought into our lives. So, life has this weird way of throwing you for a loop when you least expect it. It all kicked off with a phone call. Noah had been working his butt off for weeks, putting everything he had into a pitch for this big-time client. When he answered the phone that sunny Tuesday morning, I could tell from the look on his face that something major had gone down. "We got it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ella, we got the contract." The next few months were crazy. Noah's little design firm blew up overnight, the fancy client opening doors we never thought we'd see. Suddenly, we weren't just scraping by, we were rolling in it. But with our new success came this unexpected complication. My phone started blowing up with notifications, friend requests from family members I'd long since blocked, messages from distant relatives suddenly wanting to catch up. And then, the call I'd been dreading. "Ella, sweetheart." My mother's voice, sickly sweet, came through the line. "We've heard the wonderful news about Noah's business. We always knew you two would make it." The bullshit kept coming. My father got on the line, talking about how proud they were, how they'd always believed in us. I listened in stunned silence, getting angrier with each lie. "We'd love to see you," Mom chirped. "Maybe we could all have dinner, celebrate your success as a family?" That snapped me out of it. "As a family?" I repeated, my voice hard. "We haven't been a family for a long time, and that's not going to change just because our bank account has." I stuck to my guns. When my parents showed up at our door out of the blue, I didn't let them in. When they sent fancy gifts, I sent them right back unopened. Instead, Noah and I focused on building the life we'd always wanted. We worked hard, saved smart, and eventually found ourselves signing the papers for a beautiful apartment right in the middle of the city. Excited to share our happiness, I posted a photo on social media. It was a simple shot, Noah and I, keys in hand, standing in front of our new home. Next to it was a picture from our most recent visit with Grandma Elizabeth, her proud smile beaming at the camera. "New beginnings and old love," I captioned it. Grateful for those who've been there through it all. New home, family. As I hit post, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. This was my family now, Noah, Grandma Elizabeth, and the friends who had stood by us through thick and thin. We had built this life for ourselves, despite the odds, despite all the people who said we couldn't do it. The soft evening light was coming through the windows of our new apartment as I was busy in the kitchen, getting dinner ready for Noah and Grandma Elizabeth. It was our first real family dinner in our new place, and I wanted everything to be just right. The sudden, aggressive pounding on the front door shattered that peace in an instant. "Ella, open up. We know you're in there." My blood ran cold. I'd know those voices anywhere, Jack and Oliver. Before I could even react, the door burst open. My brothers stormed in, their faces twisted with anger. I barely had time to see Noah jumping to his feet before Jack was in my face, jabbing an accusing finger at my chest. "You manipulative little bitch," he snarled. "We always knew you were playing the long game, but this? This is low, even for you." I stumbled back, shocked by how much venom was in his voice. "What are you talking about?" Oliver laughed, and it was a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't play dumb, Ella. We saw your little social media post. Showing off your new apartment, posing with Grandma. You think we can't put two and two together?" It hit me what they were thinking. "You think Grandma bought us this apartment?" "We know she did," Jack spat. "You've been playing the poor, neglected child for years, worming your way into her good graces. And now you've manipulated her into making you the sole heir." I felt a surge of anger, straightening my spine. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Noah and I bought this apartment ourselves. With our own money, that we earned." Oliver sneered, his eyes darting around the room. "Right, sure you did. Where is the old bat anyway? Hiding her away so we can't talk sense into her? That crazy old woman should be in a cemetery by now. I can't wait for her to kick the bucket so I can sell her house and live it up." The room fell deadly silent. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined those horrific words. Then, a quiet voice spoke from the doorway of the guest room. "So this is how you truly feel about me." All heads turned to see Grandma Elizabeth standing there, her face a mask of shock and disappointment. The color drained from Jack and Oliver's faces as they realized their grandmother had heard every word. "Grandma," Jack stammered, we didn't mean." Elizabeth held up a hand, shutting him up. "I've heard enough," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I finally understand who truly values me and who sees me as nothing more than a meal ticket." I found my voice, strengthened by my grandmother's presence. "I think you both need to leave. Now." For a moment, it looked like they might argue. But one look at Grandma's face, a mixture of hurt and resolve, seemed to deflate them. They slunk towards the door, muttering weak excuses. The aftermath of that crazy evening hit like a storm. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, constantly reminding me of the mess that had blown up. Mom's name popped up on the screen for what felt like the millionth time. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Ella," her voice was sharp, not sounding like a mom at all. "You need to fix this. Your grandmother is furious with the boys. You need to smooth things over, tell her it was all a misunderstanding." I let out a bitter laugh. "A misunderstanding?" "They broke into my home and said they couldn't wait for her to die so they could sell her house." "How exactly is that a misunderstanding?" "They didn't mean it," Dad chimed in, apparently on speakerphone. "You know how the boys can be. They were just upset." "Upset about what?" I challenged. "That Noah and I bought an apartment with our own money? That Grandma loves me?" Mom's voice turned sickly sweet. "Sweetheart, we know you've always felt left out. But you need to think about what's best for the family. Your brothers deserve that inheritance. Don't be selfish." Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. "Selfish? You're calling me selfish? After years of favoritism, of dismissing my achievements, of treating Noah and me like second-class citizens? And now you have the audacity to demand I give up an inheritance I never even asked for?" "Now, Ella," Dad started, but I cut him off. "No. I'm done. I'm done with the manipulation, the guilt trips, all of it. Don't call me again. Don't text. Don't show up at my door. We're through." Over the next few days, I blocked their numbers, along with Jack and Oliver's. It was painful, like cutting off a diseased limb, but necessary for healing to begin. As the dust settled, I found myself surrounded by a different kind of warmth. Grandma Elizabeth, now fully aware of the family dynamics she had long suspected, became an even more constant presence in our lives. Aunt Sarah, who had reached out after the wedding fiasco, became a regular visitor. "I always knew you were special, Ella," she said, hugging me tightly. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner." Other relatives, cousins, and distant aunts and uncles who had witnessed my family's mistreatment over the years, reached out with messages of support. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing genuine relationships to flourish where there had once been only obligation. Noah's family, bless them, wrapped me in a blanket of unconditional love. His parents, who had watched from the sidelines as my own family tore me down, went out of their way to make me feel cherished. Noah and I threw ourselves into making our new apartment a home. Each piece of furniture, each photo on the wall, was a testament to the life we were building together, a life founded on mutual respect, support, and love. My name's Daisy, and this is the story of how I learned that family isn't always blood, and sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise to my parents, fresh out of college with stars in their eyes and careers on their minds. When my mom found out she was pregnant, she wanted an abortion. It wasn't the right time, they weren't ready, all that jazz. But my grandparents had other ideas. See, they were loaded, and they'd been bankrolling my parents' lives. When they caught wind of the pregnancy, they laid down the law: have the baby, or kiss the gravy train goodbye. From day one, I was an afterthought. My mom couldn't wait to get back to work, leaving me with a revolving door of nannies and my grandmothers. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the care they gave me, but it wasn't the same as having real parents. As I grew older, my grandparents started to back off. They'd done their duty, keeping me alive and all, and now they were off to enjoy their golden years in exotic locales. Can't blame them, I guess. But it left me even more alone. By the time I was 7, I was practically raising myself. I knew how to cook basic meals, do my own laundry, and get myself ready for school. It wasn't ideal, but it was my normal. Then, everything changed. My mom got pregnant again. This time, it was different. My parents were ready, excited even. They'd climbed the corporate ladder, made names for themselves. Now they could afford to be parents, or so they thought. When my sister was born, it was like the sun had finally risen in our house. My parents were over the moon, cooing and fawning over her like she was made of gold. And I was pushed even further into the shadows. As the years went by, the difference in how we were treated became more and more obvious. My sister got the best of everything: toys, clothes, attention. If she wanted something, she got it. If she did something wrong, it was brushed off with a laugh and a kids will be kids. Me? I learned not to ask for things. I wore hand-me-downs and made do with what I had. If I screwed up, it was met with disappointment and lectures about responsibility. Don't get me wrong, we weren't poor. Far from it. My parents were doing well, really well. But in their eyes, I was already grown, already independent. Why waste money on me when my sister needed it more? I threw myself into my studies. If I couldn't have their love, I'd have their respect. I got top grades, joined every club I could, stayed out of trouble. But it was never enough. They'd nod absently when I showed them my report card, then turn back to my sister's finger-painting masterpiece. By the time high school rolled around, I was counting the days until I could leave. I applied to colleges in secret, not telling my parents until I'd already been accepted. When I finally got into one of the best colleges, I packed my bags and left without a word. It took them 3 days to notice I was gone. 3 whole days. And even then, it was only because my mom wanted some yogurt. When she called, her voice was casual, like she was asking about the weather. "Daisy, could you pick up some low-calorie yogurt from the health food store on your way home?" I almost laughed. Here I was, starting a new chapter of my life, and all she cared about was yogurt. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm not at home." I've been at college for 3 days now. I'm living in the dorms. There was a moment of silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to process this information. Then, without a hint of remorse or concern, she said, "Oh. Well, if you come back, you'll have to stay at a hotel. We've given your room to your sister." Life at college was a breath of fresh air. But money was tight. My parents didn't offer any financial support. But my grandparents, bless their hearts, came through for me. They sent me small amounts regularly, just enough to keep me afloat. It wasn't much, but it meant everything to me. Not just the money, but the fact that someone in my family actually cared. "Daisy, dear," my grandmother would say during our infrequent phone calls, "we're so proud of you. You focus on your studies, all right? Don't worry about anything else." Those words were like a balm to my soul. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined not to let them down. I couldn't work part-time like many of my classmates, the course load was too heavy, and I was determined to excel. So I pinched pennies, lived on ramen more often than not, and made every cent count. Meanwhile, life back home continued without me. My sister, the golden child, was struggling in school. Not that it mattered to my parents, they hired the best tutors money could buy, showered her with rewards for the slightest improvement, and made excuses for her every failure. By my senior year, companies were already lining up to recruit me. My professors sang my praises, my resume was impeccable, and I had my pick of job offers. But none of them felt quite right. I wanted more. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe, just maybe, to my family, that I could make it on my own terms. So I took a leap of faith. I applied to a prestigious international company in Europe. It was a long shot, but I figured I had nothing to lose. When the acceptance email came, I nearly fell out of my chair. This was it. My ticket to a new life, a fresh start. I graduated with honors, my grandparents beaming proudly in the audience. My parents? They sent a generic congratulations card. My sister didn't even bother with that. But I didn't care. I was beyond seeking their approval. As I packed my bags for Europe, I thought about calling my parents to say goodbye. In the end, I decided against it. What was there to say? They'd made it clear where I stood in their lives. Instead, I hugged my grandparents tight, promising to call and write often. Life in Europe was everything I'd hoped for and more. Every now and then, I'd call my parents. Old habits die hard, I guess. But each conversation was like pulling teeth. They'd give monosyllabic answers, always too busy or too distracted to really talk. And they never, not once, called me. Then I met Marco. He was in the marketing department, all charm and quick wit, with a smile that could light up a room. We started as colleagues, became friends, and before I knew it, we were falling in love. When Marco proposed on a moonlit beach in Positano, I didn't hesitate. We decided to have the wedding in Italy. "We should go tell your parents in person," Marco said one night as we pored over wedding plans. "And invite them properly. It's the right thing to do." So we flew back to the States, armed with wedding invitations and hope. Foolish hope, as it turned out. From the moment we walked into my childhood home, it was clear we weren't welcome. My parents were cold, distracted. They barely looked at Marco, barely acknowledged our news. "Oh, that's nice," my mother said, her eyes on her phone. "We're terribly busy though. Your sister's new apartment needs work, and we're overseeing the renovations." We stayed for a week. A long, uncomfortable week. My parents were hardly ever home, always at my sister's new place. But my sister? She was always around, always watching, always there. I saw the way she looked at Marco. The flutter of her eyelashes, the coy smiles. It made my stomach churn. "Marco," she cooed one evening, "I'd love your opinion on the color scheme for my bedroom. Why don't you come up and take a look?" I saw the discomfort on Marco's face. "I don't think," he started, but I cut him off. "That's enough," I snapped at my sister. He's my fiancé. Back off. Her face crumpled into a pout. I was just being friendly, she whined. God, Daisy, you're so selfish. You always want everything for yourself. She stormed off, no doubt to cry to our parents. And sure enough, not 10 minutes later, my mother was there, face like thunder. How dare you speak to your sister that way, she hissed. After all we've done for you. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. All you've done for me? That's a joke, right? You've done nothing but ignore me my entire life. But it was useless. In their eyes, I was always going to be the villain. The unwanted child who dared to want more. That night, as Marco and I lay in bed in a nearby hotel, because of course, my old room was now a home gym for my sister, I made a decision. Let's go home, I said softly. Back to Italy. This isn't my home anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. Marco pulled me close, his warmth a comfort in the cold reality of my family's indifference. Okay, he said simply. Let's go home. As we boarded the plane the next day, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief to be leaving the toxicity behind, sadness for the family I never really had. Back in Italy, life slowly returned to normal. Marco and I threw ourselves into wedding planning, determined to create the perfect day. But the visit home had left a bitter taste in my mouth, a reminder of all I'd left behind. Are you sure about this? Marco asked one evening as we sat on our balcony, the sun setting over the Tuscan hills. Not inviting your sister, I mean. I took a sip of wine, letting the rich flavor roll over my tongue before answering. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said finally. After what happened. I can't have her there, Marco. I won't. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. What I didn't tell him was about the messages. The explicit, inappropriate messages my sister had been sending him on social media since we'd left. I'd seen them by accident one day when using his phone. He'd been too embarrassed, too kind to tell me. But I knew. And it was the final straw. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, venue visits, and dress fittings. Before I knew it, we were just weeks away from the big day. There was just one last thing to do. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and dialed the number I still knew by heart, even after all these years. Oh, Daisy, what is it? We're rather busy at the moment. My mother's voice, distracted as always. I swallowed hard, pushing down the hurt. I'm calling about the wedding. I booked your flights and hotel. Everything's paid for. We'd love for you and Dad to come. There was a pause, then. That's nice, dear. But what about your sister? We haven't received an invitation for her. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. She's not invited, Mom. After what happened during our visit, and the messages she's been sending Marco. I don't want her there. Messages? What messages? My mother's voice had an edge to it now. The explicit ones, Mom. The ones she's been sending my fiancé. It's inappropriate and disrespectful. I won't have that drama at my wedding. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head, trying to find a way to excuse my sister's behavior, to make me the bad guy once again. I don't know what you're talking about. Your sister would never do such a thing. Daisy, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. For once in my life, I'm putting myself first. You and Dad are welcome to come. The flight details will be emailed to you. I hope you'll be there. She didn't say anything and just hung up. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. Everything was perfect, the flowers, the music, the food. Everything except for the 2 empty seats in the front row. As the hours ticked by and guests began to arrive, a knot formed in my stomach. Where were they? Surely they couldn't do that to me. Marco, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Can we delay the ceremony a bit? I need to make a call. His eyes filled with understanding and sympathy. Of course, amore. Take all the time you need. With shaking hands, I dialed my mother's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Just as I was about to give up, there was a click. Hello? My mother's voice, groggy and irritated. Mom, where are you? The wedding's about to start. There was a pause, then, Daisy? Do you have any idea what time it is here? We were sleeping. It's the middle of the night. I felt like I'd been slapped. Sleeping? But the wedding. You were supposed to be here. I sent you the tickets, the hotel information, everything. Oh, that. Her voice turned cold. Well, we decided not to come. Your sister is having her housewarming party today. We couldn't miss that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her housewarming? But she's known about my wedding date for months. Why would she schedule it for today? Don't be selfish, Daisy. The world doesn't revolve around you. Besides, how could you expect us to go to one daughter's celebration and not the others? If you had invited your sister like you should have. Mom, I cut her off, my voice hard. You know why I didn't invite her. After what she did. That's all in your head, Daisy. Your sister would never do such a thing. You've always been jealous of her, always trying to make her look bad. I laughed, a bitter sound. Jealous? Is that what you think this is about? God, Mom, do you even hear yourself? Don't take that tone with me, young lady. This is your own fault. Your sister's party is none of my business, I finished for her. Just like my wedding is clearly none of yours. Goodbye, Mom. Enjoy the party. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. I looked at myself in the mirror, took a deep breath, and made a decision. And so, I walked down the aisle alone. No father to give me away, no mother to shed a tear. But as I looked at Marco, standing there with love shining in his eyes, I realized I didn't need them. I had everything I needed right here. Time has a way of healing wounds, or at least numbing them. Marco and I built a life together, full of love, laughter, and success. We'd both climbed the corporate ladder, our hard work paying off in promotions and accolades. We traveled, we made friends, we created a home. My parents never reached out. No congratulations on our wedding, no holiday greetings, nothing. And after a while, I stopped expecting them to. I stopped checking my phone on my birthday, stopped hoping for a Christmas card. It was easier that way. Then, on a random Tuesday in April, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a very familiar area code. My hometown. Hello? I answered, my heart pounding. Daisy, is that you? My mother's voice, sounding older, more tired than I remembered. Daisy, we need your help. And so the story came out. The company my parents had worked for, the one they'd sacrificed everything for, including their relationship with me, had gone bankrupt. They were out of work, with no savings to fall back on. We've always lived well, you know that, my mother said, a note of desperation in her voice. We know we haven't been good parents to you. But we need help, please. I closed my eyes, conflicting emotions warring inside me. Anger at their past treatment, satisfaction at their comeuppance, pity for their situation, and a small, traitorous spark of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment they'd finally see me, value me. Okay, I said finally. I'll help. How much do you need? The figure she named made me wince, but I could afford it. Marco and I had done well for ourselves, after all. I made the transfer immediately, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest. It's done, I told her. The money should be in your account soon. Over the next few months, the pattern continued. Text messages would arrive, always asking for money. The amounts were smaller now, but the requests were frequent. And every time, like a fool, I sent the money. After one such transaction, Marco found me staring at my phone, a wry smile on my face. They asked for money again, he asked gently. I nodded. and again, I sent it. God, when did I become such a sucker? Marco sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You're not a sucker, amore. You're kind. It's not your fault they can't see what an amazing daughter they have. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when my world tilted on its axis once again. I was idly scrolling through Facebook, a cup of coffee in hand, when a photo stopped me cold. My parents, looking tanned and relaxed, cocktails in hand, lounging by a pool at what was clearly a very expensive resort. My hand shook as I clicked through more photos. There they were, dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Posing in front of a luxury spa. Living it up like they didn't have a care in the world. Like they hadn't been begging me for money for months. With a growing sense of dread, I navigated to my sister's page. What I saw there made my blood run cold. Photo after photo of her with a brand new sports car, at high-end bars, designer shopping bags piled around her. And the captions. Another amazing gift from the best parents in the world. Lucky me, only child. So blessed to have parents who would do anything for me. Spoiled and proud. And there, in the comments, were my parents. Liking every post. Commenting things like, nothing but the best for our little princess, and you deserve it all, sweetheart. I felt sick. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. How could they? How dare they? As if on cue, my phone started ringing. It was them. With a deep breath, I answered. Daisy, dear, my mother's voice dripped with fake sweetness. We were wondering when you might be sending the next transfer. Life's been so hard, you know. We're thinking of renovating the house, it's gotten so old and dreary. Something in me snapped. Hard? I've seen the photos, Mom. The resort, the restaurants, the gifts for my sister. How dare you? There was a pause, then my mother's voice turned cold. Now you listen here, we gave you life. I could have had an abortion, you know. But we chose to have you. You owe us everything. Now, about that money. I didn't let her finish. I hung up, my whole body shaking with rage and hurt. The phone immediately started ringing again. And again, and again. Text messages flooded in, alternating between guilt trips and demands. I turned the phone off. Over the next few weeks, my parents continued to call and message. Demanding money, then pleading, then threatening. I ignored it all. I blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, cut off every avenue they had to reach me. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of guilt. But every time I wavered, I remembered those photos, those comments. The cruel words my mother had spat at me. Years passed, and life continued to evolve. Marco and I had built a successful life in Europe, but something was calling us back to the States. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe it was the desire to start a family of our own in familiar surroundings. Whatever the reason, we made the decision to return to my hometown. We quickly settled into our new life. A quaint house in a quiet neighborhood, prestigious jobs that challenged and excited us, and plans for the family we hoped to start soon. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. One afternoon, while having coffee with an old school friend, I learned about the dramatic turn of events in my estranged family's life. Did you hear about your sister's party? My friend asked, her eyes wide with gossip. I shook my head, bracing myself for whatever came next. It was wild, she continued. After everyone left, she fell asleep while smoking in bed. The whole house went up in flames. Your sister made it out, but the house, it's gone, Daisy. Completely destroyed. I sat there, stunned. The house I grew up in, the site of so many conflicting memories, reduced to ashes because of my sister's carelessness. That's not even the worst part, my friend added. Turns out your parents let the insurance lapse. They've lost everything. A part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, quickly followed by guilt for feeling that way. But mostly, I felt nothing. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. Life went on. Marco and I focused on our careers, our home, our future. Then, one sunny Saturday morning, a knock on the door changed everything. I opened it to find my parents standing there. They looked older, worn down. The designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair were gone, replaced by shabby, outdated outfits and graying, unkempt locks. "Daisy," my mother said, her voice trembling. "We need your help." I stood there, frozen, as they poured out their tale of woe. Living in a cramped, rented apartment. Struggling to make ends meet. No savings, no support from their own parents, unable to find work at their age. "And your sister," my father added, his voice bitter. "We asked to stay with her, in the apartment we bought her. She kicked us out. Said she didn't have room for old people." A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. The golden child, turning on them just as they had turned on me. But the laugh died in my throat as I looked at their desperate faces. "Please, Daisy," my mother pleaded. "We have nowhere else to go. You're our only hope." For a moment, I was tempted. The little girl inside me, the one who had always craved their love and approval, wanted to throw open the door and welcome them in. But then, "You owe us this," my mother said, her tone shifting from pleading to demanding. "After all, I could have aborted you. You owe us your life." And just like that, the spell was broken. I felt a calm settle over me, a certainty I had never known before. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I don't owe you anything. Not for giving birth to me, not for the years of neglect, not for choosing my sister over me time and time again. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Now, I'm asking you to leave. If you don't, I'll call the police." My father tried to step forward, but I stood my ground. "I mean it," I said. "Leave. Now. And don't come back." They left, hurling insults and threats as they went. I closed the door, leaning against it as tears finally came. Not tears of sadness or regret, but of relief. Of closure. That night, I called my grandparents. They had always been there for me, even from a distance. They listened as I poured out the whole story, offering words of comfort and support. "You did the right thing, Daisy," my grandmother said. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Especially those who wouldn't even notice if you burned." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The last ties to my toxic past had been severed. The future stretched out before me, bright and full of possibility. My name's Judy. I'm an architect by trade, and for years, that's all I cared about. Big buildings, fancy complexes, you name it, I designed it. And let me tell you, the money was good. Real good. I was all about my career, you know? Climbing that ladder, making a name for myself. And I did it, too. By the time I hit my mid-30s, I was at the top of my game. But something was missing. One day, I'm sitting in my fancy office, looking out over the city skyline I helped shape, and it hit me. I wanted a family, kids, a husband, the whole shebang. So there I was, 35 years old, and suddenly on the hunt for Mr. Right. And wouldn't you know it, I found him. We got married pretty quick. Tom, he was different from the guys I usually went for. He wasn't all about the money or the status. He was just real. One night, we're sitting on our tiny apartment balcony, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, when Tom turns to me and says, "Hey, Jude." Yeah, he called me that, like the Beatles song, "Why don't you design us a house? Your dream house. We'll get some builders, make it happen." Design our own house? It was like he'd read my mind. I'd spent years designing other people's dreams, but never my own. I was all over that idea like white on rice. So I got to work. Sketches, plans, 3D models, the works. We built that house, and it was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Open plan living area, huge windows to let in all that natural light, a kitchen that would make a celebrity chef jealous. It was us, in brick and mortar form. I was so proud of that house, I sent some photos to this fancy design magazine. Next thing I know, they're calling it the house of the year. Can you believe that? My house, our house, the best of the year. Life was good, you know? We had our dream house, our careers were going great. But something was still missing. We wanted a kid. We tried everything, tracking my cycle, special diets, you name it. Nothing. So we started with the doctors. Tests, and even more tests. But they all said the same thing, we were fine. We talked about other options. Adoption, IVF, all that stuff. But it didn't feel right for us. We decided if it happened, it happened. If not, well, we had each other, right? So we tried to move on. Focused on our careers, on each other. We traveled, we entertained, we lived. Little did I know, life was about to throw us another curveball. One that would change everything. It started with Tom feeling a bit off. Nothing major, just tired all the time, no appetite. We figured it was stress from work or something. But it didn't go away. We finally went to the doctor. I remember sitting in that sterile white room, holding Tom's hand as the doc came in. The look on his face, I knew it wasn't good news. Stomach cancer, advanced. Those words hit like a freight train. From that moment on, our lives became a whirlwind of hospitals, doctors, and treatments. I threw myself into it, researching every possible cure, every experimental treatment. We traveled to the best clinics, spent a fortune on medicines. But cancer, it's a sneaky bastard. No matter what we tried, Tom just kept getting worse. I watched the man I loved, this strong, vibrant guy, waste away before my eyes. It was like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The end came faster than we expected. One minute he was there, squeezing my hand, telling me it would be okay. The next, he was gone. I was lost. Completely and utterly lost. The house that we'd built together, our dream home, it felt empty now. I tried to keep it together, I really did. But I was falling apart. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Work became impossible. I'd stare at blueprints for hours and not see a thing. My colleagues were worried, I could tell. But what could they do? What could anyone do? About a month after the funeral, I started feeling sick. Really sick. Couldn't keep anything down, not even water. At first, I thought it was just stress, you know? Grief does weird things to your body. But then this crazy thought hit me. What if I had cancer too? I know it sounds nuts. I mean, logically, I knew stomach cancer wasn't contagious. But grief isn't logical, is it? I panicked. Drove myself to the ER in the middle of the night, convinced I was dying. The doctors there, bless them, they were patient with me. Ran a bunch of tests to calm me down. And then the doc came in with the results. I braced myself for the worst. But instead, she smiled at me. "Congratulations," she said. "You're pregnant." Pregnant. After all those years of trying, after losing Tom, after everything. I was pregnant. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So I did both. Right there in the ER, surrounded by beeping machines and worried nurses, I laughed and cried like a crazy person. As I drove home that night, my hand on my still flat stomach, I made a promise. To myself, to Tom, to this little life growing inside me. I was going to be the best damn mom I could be. The pregnancy hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I'd heard stories about morning sickness and all that, but this? This was something else entirely. I could barely drag myself out of bed most days, let alone work on complex architectural projects. My boss, Jake, he tried to be understanding at first. "Take it easy, Judy," he'd say. "We've got you covered." But as the weeks dragged on and I kept missing deadlines, I could see the frustration in his eyes. One day, he called me into his office. I knew what was coming. "Judy," he said, leaning back in his chair, We can't keep giving you the big projects if you can't deliver. I'm thinking we should move you to remote work, maybe scale back your responsibilities." I threw myself a pity party that night. Sat on the couch Tom and I had picked out together, eating ice cream straight from the tub and crying my eyes out. But then, I felt it. This tiny flutter in my belly. And just like that, I knew. This child, this little miracle growing inside me, was more important than any building I could ever design. More important than any career. The next day, I started looking for a new job. Something closer to home, something that wouldn't stress me out so much. I found a small construction company, just a few blocks from my house. The pay was, well, let's just say it was a far cry from what I was used to. But they were willing to work with my schedule, to be flexible with doctor's appointments and all that. I took the job, and you know what? It was the best decision I could have made. The months flew by. When the big day finally came, I swear I could feel Tom there with me. Cheering me on, telling me I could do this. And I did. After what felt like a lifetime of pain and pushing, their perfect little human was. As I held him for the first time, this wave of love washed over me. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before. Stronger than anything. In that moment, I knew I'd do anything for this little guy. Anything at all. I named him Thomas, after his dad. Tommy for short. And as I looked down at his sleeping face, I made another promise. I was going to give this kid the best life I possibly could. No matter what it took. The years flew by like pages in a flipbook. Before I knew it, Tommy was starting school, then middle school, then high school. And let me tell you, that kid was something else. Smart as a whip and athletic to boot. He'd come home with straight A's and trophies from track meets, grinning from ear to ear. "Look, Mom," he'd say, waving his report card or medal. "I did it." And every time, my heart would swell with pride. We didn't have much, but we had enough. A roof over our heads, food on the table, and each other. What more did we need? I made sure to be home when Tommy got back from school, to help with homework, to cheer him on at his meets. No late nights at the office for me, no sir. Tommy was my priority now. High school graduation came and went in a blink. Tommy, cap on his head and diploma in hand, beaming at me from the stage. I cried like a baby, of course. Couldn't help it. My little boy was all grown up. Then came college. Tommy got into a great school in another city. I was so proud of him, but man, it was hard to let him go. The house felt emptier than ever without him around. But you know what? It also gave me a chance to focus on myself again. I threw myself back into work, took on bigger projects. The money started flowing in again, and it felt good. I could help Tommy with his tuition, send him some extra cash for books and stuff. Every weekend, I'd hop in the car and drive to see him. We'd grab lunch, catch a movie, just hang out. It was different, sure, but it was still us. Still good. After graduation, Tommy decided to stay in the city. Got himself a good job and everything. I was happy for him, really I was. But a part of me missed having him close by. A few years went by like that. Me working hard, Tommy building his life in the city. Then one day, he called me up, sounding all excited. "Mom, I've met someone," he said. "Her name's Sarah. She's amazing, Mom. I think she might be the one." I was thrilled for him, of course. All I ever wanted was for Tommy to be happy. And from what he told me, this Sarah sounded perfect. Smart, beautiful, from a good family. Tommy was head over heels. But then things started to change. Tommy called me up one day, out of the blue. "Hey, Mom," he said, sounding a bit sheepish. "I was wondering, could you maybe help me out with buying a car? And, maybe send a bit more money each month? I want to take Sarah out, buy her nice things, you know?" I felt my heart sink a little. This wasn't like Tommy at all. He'd always been so responsible with money. "Honey," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle, "you know I'd do anything for you. But a car? And extra money for gifts? That's a lot to ask. You've got a good job. Why can't you save up for these things yourself?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Tommy spoke again, his voice was cold. "I thought you'd understand," he said. "I thought you'd want me to be happy. But I guess I was wrong." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like I'd just been slapped. After that, things were different. Tommy didn't call as often. When he did, our conversations were short, stilted. It felt like there was this wall between us now, all because I wouldn't buy him a car or fund his lavish dates. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase. That Tommy would come around, realize that love wasn't about fancy cars or expensive gifts. But as the weeks turned into months, and the phone calls got fewer and farther between, I couldn't help but worry. A year passed in a blink. Then one day, out of the blue, Tommy showed up on my doorstep. He wasn't alone. "Mom," he said, grinning from ear to ear, "I want you to meet Sarah. We're getting married." Sarah was everything Tommy had described, pretty, polite, the works. But there was something off. The way she looked at me, it was like I was some quaint little curiosity. Still, I plastered on a smile and welcomed them in. "Oh, what a lovely home," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes roving over every inch of the place. "It's so charming and comfortable." They stayed for dinner, chattering about wedding plans. Sarah's parents were footing the bill, apparently. As they talked, I couldn't help but notice how different Tommy seemed. Gone was my down-to-earth boy. In his place was this stranger, all flash and no substance. The wedding was, well, it was something else. More like a coronation than a marriage ceremony. I felt like a fish out of water, surrounded by all these fancy folks in their designer duds. Tommy barely had time to say hello, too busy schmoozing with Sarah's family and friends. After that, I threw myself into work. Took on big projects, worked longer hours. The money started piling up, and I had this crazy idea. I'd design a house for Tommy and Sarah, build it from the ground up. A wedding gift, you know? But something held me back. I decided to wait, see how things played out. Months went by. Then one day, Tommy and Sarah showed up again. "Mom," Tommy said, "we've been thinking. This house is too big for you alone. Why don't we move in? Keep you company?" I was over the moon. I helped them move in, rearranged things to make room. It felt good, having life in the house again. But that feeling didn't last long. A month in, and Sarah started throwing her weight around. Ordering me around in my own kitchen, demanding fancy meals and expensive wines. "Look," I said one day, trying to keep my cool, "this is still my house. I appreciate you being here, but..." Sarah cut me off with a shriek. "Tommy, did you hear how she spoke to me?" And to my shock, Tommy yelled at me. At me, his own mother. After that, things got real cold. They barely spoke to me, like I was some kind of ghost haunting my own home. Then one night, I overheard them talking. "We need to get rid of her," Sarah was saying. "This house is wasted on her." "Yeah," Tommy replied, and my heart nearly stopped. Mom's had her time. Maybe we should look into nursing homes. I couldn't believe my ears. My own son, plotting to throw me out of my home? The home I'd designed, that I'd raised him in? I stepped around the corner, fury boiling in my veins. "How dare you," I spat. Tommy looked shocked, then guilty. But one glance at Sarah, and his face hardened. "Mom," he said, his voice cold, "I think it's time for you to leave." That was it, the last straw. "Leave?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh no, sweetheart. This is my house, my name on the deed. If anyone's leaving, it's you too." Tommy's face went red. "But Mom..." "No buts," I cut him off. Pack your bags. Both of you. They tried to argue, but I stood firm. This was my house, damn it. As I watched them drive away, bags piled in the back of their fancy car, I felt empty. How had it come to this? Where had I gone wrong? The calm after the storm didn't last long. My phone started ringing off the hook, Tommy's name flashing on the screen every time. At first, I ignored it, but eventually, I picked up. Mom, Tommy's voice was cold, calculated. We need to talk about the house. It's half mine, by law. Dad left it to me too. I felt my blood pressure rising. That's not true, Tommy. Your father left everything to me. Well, I'm challenging that. I want half the value of the house. It's my right as Dad's son. He hung up on me, just like that. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like the world was spinning out of control. I'd been planning to build them a house, for crying out loud. A wedding gift, a fresh start. But now I didn't want to give them a damn thing. I called up Jack, Tom's old friend from law school. Explained the situation, my voice shaking. Judy, Jack said, his voice calm and reassuring. You're in the clear legally. Tom's will left everything to you. No contest. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But Jack wasn't done. However, he continued. If Tommy decides to sue, well, it could get messy. Expensive. And drawn out. I spent the next few weeks in a daze. I kept hoping Tommy would come to his senses, that his conscience would kick in. But the phone calls kept coming, each one more demanding than the last. Then, one morning, I woke up to a commotion outside. I peeked out the window and felt my heart stop. There, on my front lawn, was a giant for sale sign. I ran outside in my robe, not caring what the neighbors thought. And boy, were they curious. Judy, you selling the place? Mrs. Peterson from next door called out. Moving to be closer to your son? Mr. Johnson asked, pausing his morning jog. I stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What could I say? That my son was trying to force me out of my own home? I tried calling Tommy, my fingers shaking as I dialed. Straight to voicemail. With a grunt of frustration, I yanked the sign out of the ground. It came up easier than I expected, nearly sending me tumbling backward. I dragged it into the garage, out of sight. Back in the house, I sank onto the couch, the same one where Tom and I used to sit, where I'd nursed Tommy as a baby. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry. I was Judy goddamn Miller. I'd designed skyscrapers, for Pete's sake. I'd raised a child on my own. I'd faced worse than this. I was trying to relax that evening, curled up on the couch with a book I couldn't focus on, when I heard the front door open. My heart leapt. Was it Tommy, coming to his senses? But the voices I heard weren't just Tommy's. There were strangers in my house. I got up, my legs shaky, and made my way to the foyer. And there they were, Tommy, Sarah, and a couple I'd never seen before, all standing in my entryway like they owned the place. And this is the living room, Tommy was saying, gesturing grandly. Original hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows. The couple was nodding, looking impressed. It's stunning, the woman said. We'll take it. When can we move in? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Excuse me, I said, my voice quavering. This house is not for sale. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave. Tommy's face twisted into something ugly. He turned to the couple and said, loudly, Don't mind her. She's not well. Dementia, you know. Sad, really. I felt like I'd been slapped. Tommy, I gasped. How dare you? But he talked over me, continuing his tour like I wasn't even there. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone. I'm calling the police, I announced. All of you, out. Now. The couple looked uncertain, glancing between me and Tommy. Finally, they mumbled some excuses and headed for the door. As they left, Sarah turned to me, her eyes cold. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll never see Tommy again. Or your grandchild." That's when I noticed it, the slight swell of her belly under her designer blouse. My grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I barely noticed them leaving, the door slamming behind them. The next few months were a blur of courtrooms and sleepless nights. Tommy and Sarah, bankrolled by her parents, hired a team of slick lawyers. They threw everything they had at me, claims of mental incompetence, accusations of abuse against Tommy, you name it. I was exhausted. Bone deep, soul-crushing exhausted. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Eventually, I had to quit my job, I just couldn't keep up anymore. One afternoon, as I was bringing in the mail, more legal documents, of course, my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, came over. "Judy," she said, her kind face creased with concern. "Have you thought about going public with this? You know, telling your story on TV? Sometimes, sunlight is the best disinfectant." I brushed her off, it felt wrong, somehow, to air our dirty laundry in public. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Listen, you old fool," Tommy's voice crackled over the line. "Just give up already. You're embarrassing yourself." Something in me snapped. The next day, I called the local news station. It was time to tell my story. The TV interview aired, and for a few days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, old friends, even a few lawyers offering their services. I ignored them all. I was tired, so tired. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, ready for another reporter, but instead found myself face to face with Sarah's parents. My heart sank. This was it, I thought. They're here to finish what Tommy and Sarah started. But to my shock, they looked ashamed. "Judy," Sarah's mother said, her voice barely above a whisper, we had no idea. We're so sorry." They came in, and over coffee, the whole story came out. They'd seen the TV interview, learned for the first time what their daughter and Tommy had been up to. The lawsuit, the attempts to sell my house, all of it. "We spoiled Sarah," her father admitted, shaking his head. "And now, well, she's always asking for money." They told me how they'd bought Tommy and Sarah an apartment. But Sarah had demanded a house instead. She said she'd handle it herself, her mother said, dabbing at her eyes. We had no idea this is what she meant. I sat there, stunned. I was going to build them a house, I said, my voice cracking. As a wedding gift. But after all this, I just can't. Sarah's parents nodded, understanding in their eyes. "We're cutting them off," her father said firmly. "No more money. Not for lawyers, not for anything." True to their word, they did just that. Without the financial backing, Tommy and Sarah's case fell apart. The lawsuit was dismissed, and just like that, it was over. Months passed. I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had given birth to a little girl. The thought made my heart ache. More time went by. I threw myself back into work, trying to rebuild the life that had been put on hold. Then one day, out of the blue, there was a tap on the door. It was Tommy. The moment I opened, he burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I was selfish and stupid, and... God, Mom, I had no idea how hard it was to be a parent. What you went through, raising me alone." I stood there, watching my son cry, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said finally. "What you did, it's going to take time to get past that. But I'd like to meet my granddaughter." We worked out an arrangement. I'd babysit sometimes, buy clothes and toys for the baby. It was a start. The first time I held little Emma, I felt my heart melt. She had Tommy's eyes, my nose. She was perfect. Over time, things, well, they didn't go back to normal. I don't think they ever could. But they got better. Sarah became less demanding, even thanked me once for my help. Tommy, he was trying. Really trying. do I forgive him? I don't know. Some days, when I'm playing with Emma, seeing Tommy smile in hers, I think maybe I can. Other days, when the memory of what he did hits me, it feels impossible. But you know what? I'm not focusing on that right now. I'm just living, day by day. Enjoying my work, my home, my granddaughter. The future? Well, that'll sort itself out in time. I'm Kimberly, and this is the story of how my family fell apart. It all started when I was 7 years old, and my little brother Tommy turned 5. I remember the day clearly. Mom had taken Tommy to his first real music lesson. When they came back, she was practically floating on air. "Kim, come here," she called out, her voice high with excitement. I came running down the stairs, wondering what all the fuss was about. "Your brother is a musical genius." I didn't really know what that meant, but I could tell it was important. "That's great," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "The teacher says he has perfect pitch," Mom continued, her eyes shining. "Do you know how rare that is? He's going to be a star, I just know it." From that day on, it was all about Tommy. Mom quit her part-time job to focus on his career. She'd spend hours researching music competitions and TV shows for kids. Our living room turned into a mini recording studio, with a keyboard, microphone, and even a small karaoke machine. Don't get me wrong, Tommy was good. When he sang, his voice was clear and pure, like a little angel. But I couldn't help feeling left out. Mom was too wrapped up in Tommy's potential stardom, and Dad was barely around. He'd leave for work before I woke up and come home after I was in bed. On weekends, he'd tinker in the garage or watch TV, too exhausted to do much else. So, I learned to take care of myself. I'd make my own lunches, do my homework without being asked, and try not to bother anyone with my problems. It wasn't all bad, though. I had my books, my few close friends, and my grandma. Grandma was Mom's mother, but they couldn't have been more different. While Mom was all about the spotlight and fame, Grandma was down-to-earth and practical. She owned a small convenience store in town, and I started helping out there after school when I was 12. "You're a good worker, Kimberly," she'd say, smiling at me over her glasses. "Smart with money, too. That'll serve you well in life." Those words meant more to me than all the vague praise I got at home. At least someone saw me for who I was, not just as Tommy's sister. Speaking of Tommy, he was thriving under Mom's attention. By the time he was 7, he'd already won a few local singing competitions. Mom would come home, waving his trophies and certificates, her face glowing with pride. "Did you see Tommy on TV last night?" she'd ask me, not waiting for an answer. The judges said he was the most talented child they'd seen in years. I'd nod and smile, trying to be happy for my brother. But I couldn't help the twinge of jealousy when I saw how differently we were treated. Tommy had the latest toys and gadgets, while I had to save up my allowance for months to buy anything I wanted. As I entered high school, the divide between Tommy and me grew even wider. While I attended the local public school, Mom enrolled Tommy in an expensive private academy known for its music program. Every morning, she'd drop him off in our beat-up minivan, fussing over his uniform and reminding him about his after-school voice lessons. Meanwhile, I'd be halfway to school already, having caught the early bus. One day, after a particularly grueling day of classes and a shift at Grandma's store, I came home to find Mom and Tommy sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by brochures and flyers. "What's all this?" I asked, dropping my backpack by the door. Mom looked up, her eyes shining with excitement. "Oh, Kim, you won't believe it. Tommy's been invited to audition for the National Youth Choir. The audition's in New York. We'll need to buy new clothes, book flights, a hotel." I couldn't help but ask, "Can we afford all that?" Mom's smile faltered for a moment. "We'll manage. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Tommy. We can't let it pass by." I nodded, knowing better than to argue. But as I headed up to my room, I couldn't help but wonder, what about my opportunities? It wasn't that I was jealous of Tommy's talent. I was proud of him, in a way. But I was tired of being an afterthought in my own family. That night, I heard Mom and Dad arguing in their bedroom. Their voices were muffled, but I could make out enough to know it was about money. "We're already in debt, Linda," Dad was saying. "We can't keep spending like this." "But this could be Tommy's big break," Mom insisted. "Don't you want him to succeed?" "Of course I do," Dad sighed. "But what about Kim? We haven't put aside anything for her college fund." There was a pause, and then Mom's voice, softer now, "Kim's smart. She'll get scholarships. Besides, she's always been independent. She'll figure something out." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, their words echoing in my head. She'll figure something out. That's what it always came down to, didn't it? I was expected to fend for myself while they poured everything into Tommy's future. The next day, I went to work at Grandma's store. As I was restocking shelves, Grandma called me over to the counter. "Kimberly," she said, her voice gentle. "Is everything all right? You seem distracted today." I hesitated for a moment, then the whole story came spilling out: Tommy's audition, the money problems, my fears about college. Grandma listened patiently, her face growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, she shook her head. "Listen, I've been thinking. You're a hard worker, Kimberly. How would you like to start earning a real wage here at the store? Not just pocket money, but something you could save for your future." For the first time in a long while, I felt seen and appreciated. As I hugged my grandmother, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could create my own opportunities. I didn't need to wait for someone else to invest in my future. With Grandma's help, I could start investing in myself. As the years went by, I threw myself into my studies and my work at Grandma's store. By the time I was 15, I'd managed to save up a decent amount. My goal? A laptop for school. One Friday afternoon, I decided to count my savings. I went to my closet and pulled out the pink ceramic piggy bank Grandma had given me years ago. But when I shook it, something felt off. The familiar jingle of coins was missing. My heart racing, I opened the bottom and turned it over. Nothing, not a single coin fell out. With shaking hands, I made my way downstairs. Tommy was sprawled on the couch, playing video games on a shiny new console. "Hey, Tommy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You haven't seen my piggy bank, have you? Or the money inside it?" He barely glanced up from his game. "Nope, sorry." I took a deep breath and headed to the kitchen, where Mom was preparing dinner. "Mom," I began, Did you take the money from my piggy bank?" She turned to me, her face calm. "Oh, that. Yes, I did." Tommy needed a new game console. His old one broke, and he was so upset. "I knew you had some savings, so I took it." I stood there, speechless. Tears were threatening to spill, but I refused to let them fall. When will you pay me back?" I managed to ask. Mom sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "We'll see. Times are tight right now, with all of Tommy's expenses. You understand, don't you? This is an investment in his future." I didn't understand. I couldn't understand how she could do this to me. Without another word, I turned and ran out of the house. I kept running until I reached Grandma's store, tears blurring my vision. Grandma took one look at me and flipped the open sign to closed. She led me to the back room and sat me down. "What happened, Kimberly?" she asked gently. Between sobs, I told her everything. As I spoke, I watched Grandma's face change from concern to disbelief to anger. "What am I going to do, Grandma?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. "I can't trust them." Grandma was quiet for a moment, then she stood up. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into the front of the store. When she came back, she was carrying a laptop box. "I was saving this for your birthday," she said, placing the box in my lap. "But I think you need it now. Just don't take this home. Keep it here at the store." Use it after your shifts or on weekends. I don't want your mother getting her hands on this too. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. I would work harder, save more, and find a way out of this house where I felt like a stranger. My 16th birthday rolled around with little fanfare. Mom remembered the date this time, at least. She and Dad wished me a happy birthday over breakfast, Dad sliding a card across the table before rushing off to work. I invited a few close friends. We set up some folding tables in the backyard, strung up some lights, and had a pretty good time. I'd saved up from my job at Grandma's store to buy snacks and drinks. My best friend Rachel helped me decorate with some balloons and streamers we got from the dollar store. As we sat around, eating chips and laughing about school drama, I caught myself feeling genuinely happy. For a moment, I could forget about the family dynamics and just be a normal teenager celebrating her birthday. But reality has a way of creeping back in. When Tommy's 16th birthday came around 2 years later, it was an extravaganza. They rented out the fanciest restaurant in town, invited what seemed like half the city, and even hired a professional photographer. The cherry on top? A shiny new car parked outside with a big red bow. I stood off to the side during the party, watching Tommy beam as he accepted congratulations and gifts. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to resent him. This wasn't his fault. He was just living the life our parents, especially Mom, had orchestrated for him. A few months later, I was thrilled to learn I'd been accepted to study economics at a college in the next state. Even better, I'd earned a partial scholarship. But as I soon discovered, partial was the operative word. The scholarship wouldn't cover all my expenses. With trepidation, I approached my parents one evening. "Mom, Dad," I began. "I got into State University for economics. I have a scholarship, but I'll need some help with the rest of the tuition and living expenses." Dad looked up from his newspaper, a crease between his brows. "That's great news about the scholarship, Kim. But you know money's tight right now. With Tommy's music school fees." Mom jumped in. "Kimberly, you're a smart girl. I'm sure you can figure something out. Maybe get a job? You've always been so independent." Defeated, I retreated to my room. As I sat on my bed, staring at the acceptance letter, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Grandma, asking how the conversation with my parents went. I called her back, my voice shaking as I recounted what had happened. Grandma listened quietly, then said, "Kimberly, don't you worry. We'll figure this out together." True to her word, Grandma set up a college fund for me. Between that, my scholarship, and a part-time job I picked up at a cafe near campus, I managed to make it work. "You're going to do great things, Kimberly," Grandma said. "I'm so proud of you." Those words carried me through the tough times in college. When I was up late studying, or pulling double shifts at the cafe, I'd remember Grandma's faith in me and push through. I called Tommy occasionally, trying to keep our connection alive. He was at a prestigious music college, all expenses paid by our parents, of course. Despite the differences in our situations, it was nice to hear his voice, to know that at least one person in that house might be missing me. After 4 grueling years of balancing studies, work, and tight budgets, I finally graduated with my degree in economics. Armed with my hard-earned qualifications and a determination to succeed, I returned to my hometown. It wasn't long before I landed a job at a prestigious financial firm and found a small but comfortable apartment to rent. Life settled into a pleasant routine. Work was challenging but rewarding, and in my free time I started to build a life for myself outside of my family's shadow. I made new friends, took up hiking on weekends, and even started dating a bit. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. She stepped inside, wringing her hands. "Kimberly, I need your help." Those words sent a chill down my spine. In all my years, I couldn't remember my mother ever asking for my help. "What's wrong?" I asked, leading her to the couch. She sat down heavily, her eyes brimming with tears. I'm sick, Kim, really sick. The doctors, they say I need treatment, but our insurance won't cover it all. My heart dropped. Despite everything, she was still my mother. How much do you need? $15,000, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know it's a lot, but I didn't know where else to turn. Your father and we've spent everything on Tommy's education. We thought it would pay off by now, but... The next morning, we drove to the bank in silence. As we waited in line, Mom started talking, her voice low. You know, Tommy's doing so well, she said. He's got offers from several big music groups. Once he signs, we'll be able to pay you back in no time. I nodded, only half listening. My mind was racing, thinking about how I'd manage the loan repayments on top of my rent and other expenses. After signing what felt like a mountain of paperwork, I transferred the $15,000 to my mother's account. As we left the bank, she hugged me tightly. A few days later, I was scrolling through my social media feed during my lunch break when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was Tommy, my brother, posting selfies from the Swiss Alps. Confused, I quickly sent him a message. Hey Tommy, aren't you supposed to be in school? What are you doing in Switzerland? His reply came quickly, oh, hey Kim. Yeah, Mom surprised me with this trip. Said I was having a creative block and needed to recharge. It's amazing here. I'm staying for 2 months. I stared at my phone, my mind refusing to process what I was reading. 2 months in Switzerland? Creative block? Then it hit me. The $15,000 loan. It wasn't for medical treatment, it was for Tommy's vacation. With shaking hands, I called my mother. Kimberly, what is it now? Her voice was irritated, as if I was interrupting something important. I took a deep breath. Mom, we need to talk about the loan. About Tommy's trip. How could you lie to me like that? There was a pause, then she sighed. Now, listen here. Your brother is a creative person. He needs constant inspiration and pampering to open up creatively. This trip was essential for his career. He's going to be famous, and we all need to support him. Support him? I echoed, my voice rising. By taking out loans we can't afford? By lying to your other child? Oh, don't be such a miser, she scoffed. You should be happy to support your brother. That was the last straw. Mom, I want the money back. All of it. Now. Her laugh was cold. Don't be ridiculous, Kimberly. The money's spent. Besides, you're doing well enough. You don't need it. If you don't pay me back, I said, my voice shaking with anger, I'll sue you. There was a moment of stunned silence, then she exploded. Sue me? Your own mother? You're a terrible daughter. I can't believe I raised such a selfish, heartless child. This is your last chance, Mom, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Pay me back, or I'm going to court. Go ahead, she spat. See if I care. You're dead to me, Kimberly. Dead. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, shaking with a mix of anger and shock. I'd known this conversation wouldn't go well, but I never imagined it would end like this. In a daze, I called the one person I knew I could always count on, Grandma. I broke down, sobbing as I recounted everything that had happened. Grandma listened patiently, making soothing noises as I poured out my heart. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Grandma spoke, her voice firm. Kimberly, listen to me. What your mother did was wrong. If you decide to go through with this, I'll support you. I know a good lawyer, my friend's son. He might be willing to take on your case for a reduced fee. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal consultations, paperwork, and sleepless nights. True to her word, Grandma covered the legal fees and introduced me to her friend's son, a sharp young lawyer named Michael. It's an open and shut case, Michael assured me after our first meeting. We have the bank records, the text messages. Your mother doesn't have a leg to stand on. The day of the trial arrived. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw my mother for the first time in months. She sat on the other side, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't even look at me. The proceedings seemed to pass in a blur. Michael presented our case clearly and concisely, showing the judge the evidence of my mother's deception. When it was her turn to speak, my mother spun a tale of a desperate need for a family medical emergency, but her story quickly fell apart under questioning. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge made his ruling. In the matter of Kimberly Johnson versus Linda Johnson, he began, "I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to repay the full amount of $15,000, plus interest and court costs." A few days later, I received notice that my mother had taken out a loan to repay me. The money was back in my account, but it felt hollow somehow. I'd won the case, but I'd lost my family in the process. The dust had barely settled from the court case when the real storm hit. It started with a notification on my phone. A friend had tagged me in a post. Curious, I opened it, only to feel my stomach drop. There, on my mother's social media page, was a long, heart-wrenching post about how her own daughter had cruelly taken her to court. She painted herself as a loving, sacrificial mother who had given everything for her children, only to be betrayed in her time of need. My phone buzzed constantly over the next few days as more relatives reached out, not to hear my side, but to berate me for my actions. "I raised you better than this," my aunt scolded. "You brought shame to this entire family," a cousin messaged. "Don't bother coming to the next family reunion," an uncle warned. In the midst of this storm, there was one unwavering source of support, Grandma. She called me every day, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "Don't you pay any mind to those fools," she'd say firmly. "They don't know the half of what's been going on in that house all these years." A week after my mother's posts went viral, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years, my father's. "I'd been seeing your mother's posts," he began, and I braced myself for the criticism. But then he surprised me. "I want to hear your side of the story. The full story." So I told him everything. The years of feeling overlooked, the incident with my piggy bank, the struggles through college, and finally, the loan and the betrayal that led to the lawsuit. There was a long silence when I finished. Then, to my shock, my father's voice came back thick with emotion. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "Kimberly, I'm so sorry. I failed you as a father. I followed your mother's lead for too long. I told myself I was providing for the family by working long hours, but the truth is, I was running away from the problems at home. I should have been there for you." Tears were streaming down my face now. This was the most open, honest conversation I'd had with my father in, well, ever. "I've got a lot to make up for," he said. "I know that. But if you're willing, I'd like to try. To be the father I should have been all along." As we continued to talk, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a parent in my corner. It wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but it was a start. After our heart-to-heart, Dad decided to take a closer look at the family finances, something he admitted he should have done years ago. He had found that Mom had been secretly withdrawing money from their joint account for years, funneling it all into Tommy's career. But that wasn't the worst of it. She'd taken out multiple loans in both their names, all to fund Tommy's pursuits. They were drowning in debt, and Dad had been completely in the dark. The confrontation that followed was explosive. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from the neighbors. There was shouting, the sound of dishes shattering, and finally, the arrival of police cars. In the aftermath, Dad filed for divorce. The proceedings were messy, but in the end, Mom got half of everything, which went straight to paying off her mountain of debt. I maintained my distance from Mom, focusing on rebuilding my relationship with Dad and cherishing the unwavering support of Grandma. Life started to feel normal. Then, about a year after the divorce, Mom's triumphant posts started appearing on social media again. Tommy had graduated from his music college and landed a spot in a famous band. Her captions were full of "I told you so's" and thinly veiled jabs at Dad and me. "Some people couldn't see the potential," she wrote. "But a mother always knows." Who's laughing now? I tried not to let it get to me. I was doing well at work, had just made a down payment on my own apartment, and was finally feeling like I was on solid ground. Dad was doing better too, seeming happier and more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 2 years after Tommy's big break, he took another trip to Switzerland. His social media was full of glamorous shots of the Alps, videos of him partying with his bandmates. Then, one chilly morning, he decided to film himself singing at the top of a mountain, wanting to impress his fans with his vocal range in the thin, cold air. It was a disaster. He caught a severe cold that developed into a serious throat infection. Despite the best medical care, the damage was done. Tommy lost his singing voice. The news hit Mom hard. Her neighbors later told me that they heard screaming coming from her house, sounds of things being thrown and broken. When they went to check on her, they found her in a state of total hysteria. She didn't recognize anyone, kept babbling about lost fortunes and ruined dreams. They had no choice but to call for help. Mom was admitted to a mental health facility. The doctors diagnosed her with a severe nervous breakdown, exacerbated by years of stress. As for Tommy, he spiraled into depression and turned to alcohol. For months, we weren't sure if he'd pull through. But slowly, with support from Dad and me, he started to turn things around. He got sober and, in a twist that surprised us all, applied to college to become a music teacher. "I can't sing anymore," he told me over coffee one day. "But maybe I can help other kids who love music. Do it right, you know? Without all the pressure and crazy expectations." I felt a surge of pride for my little brother. "I think that's a great idea, Tommy." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the tumultuous journey of the past few years. I thought about Mom, still in the facility, trapped in a world of her own making. About Dad, finally free to live his own life. About Tommy, finding a new path. And about myself. I'd stood my ground, fought for what was right, and come out stronger on the other side. My name's Rachel, and boy, do I have a story to tell you. It all started after I graduated college and landed a job as a flight attendant. Fresh-faced and eager, I was ready to take on the world, one flight at a time. It was on one of those routine flights that I met him, Jack. Tall, handsome, with a smile that could light up the cockpit. Yeah, you guessed it, he was the pilot. Our eyes met as I was doing the pre-flight checks, and I swear, it was like something out of a cheesy romance movie. From that moment on, Jack and I were inseparable. We'd grab coffee during layovers, swap stories about passengers, and before I knew it, we were dating. It was a whirlwind romance, the kind you read about in books or see in movies. We were young, in love, and the sky was literally the limit. 6 months after we met, Jack proposed. It wasn't anything fancy, just us, on the beach, during a stopover in Hawaii. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack got down on one knee, sand sticking to his uniform pants, and pulled out a ring. We got married in a small ceremony a few months later. Life was perfect, or so I thought. It was about a year into our marriage. I was working a long-haul flight from New York to Tokyo. Everything was going smoothly until we hit some turbulence over the Pacific. I was in the middle of the cabin, making sure everyone was secure. That's when it happened. The plane suddenly dropped, like the bottom had fallen out of the sky. I was thrown off my feet, my body slamming into the overhead compartments before I hit the floor. Pain, blinding, white-hot pain shot through my back. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Panic set in as I realized something was seriously wrong. The rest of the flight was a blur. Emergency landing in Anchorage, being rushed to the hospital, doctors poking and prodding. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut, severe spinal injury. Just like that, my life in the sky was over. The airline was good about it, I'll give them that. They paid for my medical bills, offered me a hefty compensation. Jack was my rock through it all. He'd sit by my hospital bed, hold my hand as I went through physical therapy. "We'll get through this, Ratch," he'd say. "Together." And we did. Slowly but surely, I learned to walk again. But flying? That was off the table. The doctors were clear, any more stress on my spine could lead to permanent damage. So, I had to reinvent myself. The airline offered me a position in their ground staff, and I took it. It wasn't the same as being up in the air, but it was something. With the compensation money, Jack and I decided to buy a house. A beautiful, spacious place in a nice neighborhood. It was more than we needed, really, but Jack insisted. "You deserve this, Rachel," he said. "After everything you've been through." As Jack and I settled into our new house, I thought we were finally getting our happily ever after. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of my sister-in-law, Sarah. From the moment I met her, I could tell Sarah didn't like me. She was Jack's younger sister, married with a 4-year-old son, but there was always this edge to her. Like she was constantly sizing me up, looking for flaws. I remember the first time she visited our new house. Her eyes darted around, taking in every detail. "Well, isn't this nice?" she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You certainly landed on your feet after that accident, didn't you, Rachel? Some people have all the luck, I guess. Even when they fall, they land in a pile of money." I bit my tongue, not wanting to start a fight. Jack had always been close to his sister, despite her difficult personality. I didn't want to be the one to come between them. Over the next few months, Sarah's visits became more frequent, and her comments more biting. Every time she came over, it was like walking on eggshells. I tried to be the bigger person, to ignore her jabs and passive-aggressive remarks. But it was wearing me down. One day, after a particularly nasty comment about how I was milking my injury, I confronted Jack about it. "I can't take it anymore," I said, tears of frustration in my eyes. "Your sister hates me, and I don't know why." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's just, Sarah. She's always been jealous of others. It's not you, it's her. I'll talk to her, okay? She needs to back off." But talking to Sarah didn't seem to help. If anything, it made her more resentful. She'd make a show of being polite when Jack was around, but the moment he was out of earshot, the claws would come out. It all came to a head about a year after we moved in. Sarah showed up unannounced one afternoon, all smiles and sweetness. I was immediately on guard. "Rachel, darling," she cooed, and I had to resist the urge to check for flying pigs. "I have a huge favor to ask." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Well, you see, Tommy's 5th birthday is coming up," she said, referring to her son. "And I was wondering, could we possibly have his party here?" I must have looked shocked, because she quickly added, "It's just, your house is so beautiful, and I have some important business contacts I want to impress. It would mean so much to me." I hesitated. On one hand, this was Sarah, the woman who'd made my life miserable for the past year. On the other, maybe this was an olive branch? A chance to finally build a better relationship? Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. In the weeks leading up to Tommy's birthday, I threw myself into party planning with gusto. I spent hours scouring the internet for party ideas, saving Pinterest boards, and watching YouTube tutorials. I wanted everything to be perfect, from the decorations to the food, right down to the party favors. The day before the party, I was a whirlwind of activity. I'd ordered beautiful decorations, balloons in Tommy's favorite colors, a custom banner, and even hired a face painter. The snacks were all prepared, a mix of kid-friendly treats and some fancier hors d'oeuvres for the adults. I'd even baked the cake myself, a 3-tiered masterpiece covered in fondant and decorated with little rocket ships. Tommy was going through a space phase. As I was putting the finishing touches on the living room decorations, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Everything ready for tomorrow?" Remember, first impressions are everything. I rolled my eyes, but texted back a cheerful, all set. It's going to be great. When morning finally came, I was up at the crack of dawn, double and triple checking everything. Jack had an early flight, so he kissed me goodbye and wished me luck before heading out. "You've got this," he said, giving me a reassuring smile. "And remember, it's just a kid's birthday party. Don't stress too much." I nodded, but inside, I knew it was more than just a party. It was my chance to finally prove myself to Sarah, to show her that I was a valuable part of this family. As the clock ticked closer to party time, I got dressed in my nicest outfit, a pretty floral dress that I hoped struck the right balance between casual and put together. I did my hair and makeup, wanting to look my best for Sarah's important business contacts. Just as I was giving the living room one final once-over, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. Showtime. I opened the door with a bright smile, ready to welcome Sarah and Tommy. "Happy birthday, big guy," I said, kneeling down to Tommy's level. Sarah breezed past me, her eyes scanning the decorated living room. "Well, it looks adequate," she said, her tone making it clear that adequate was a stretch. I bit back a retort and instead held out the beautifully wrapped gift for Tommy. "Here you go, sweetie. I hope you like it." Sarah snatched the gift from my hands before Tommy could reach for it. "We'll open presents later," she said curtly. Then, her eyes locked onto mine, a strange glint in them. "Rachel, dear, I need you to go to the city park and take a nice long walk. Say, 2 or 3 hours?" I blinked, sure I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Sarah's smile tightened. "You heard me. I'll meet the guests myself. You're superfluous here." The words hit me like a slap. "Sarah, this is my home. I'm not going anywhere. I've spent weeks preparing for this party. I thought we could finally build a good relationship." Sarah's laughter cut through the air, sharp and mocking. "Oh, Rachel, you're so naive. I have no interest in being friends with you. None whatsoever." Before I could process what was happening, Sarah had grabbed my arm and was pushing me towards the door. I tried to resist, but she was surprisingly strong. "Sarah, stop. What are you doing?" With a final shove, I found myself stumbling out onto the front porch. The door slammed behind me, the sound echoing in the quiet neighborhood. I stood there, stunned, my mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. I patted my pockets, realizing with growing horror that I had nothing but my phone. As if reading my thoughts, the door opened again. Sarah appeared, holding my purse and car keys. "Here," she said, tossing them at my feet. "Now get out of here. I don't want you embarrassing me in front of my friends." The door slammed shut again, leaving me alone in the driveway, staring at my own front door in disbelief. Numbly, I picked up my purse and keys and got into my car. My hands were shaking as I tried to figure out what to do. I dialed Jack's number, praying he'd pick up, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, he was on a flight. In desperation, I called my mother-in-law. Surely she'd see reason. "Linda, thank God," I said, my voice cracking. "Sarah's thrown me out of my own house. She's having Tommy's party without me. You've got to help me." There was a pause, and then Linda's voice came back, cold and dismissive. "Rachel, dear, I'm sure you're exaggerating. I'll be there soon to celebrate with my daughter and grandson. This is their day. Why don't you just stay out for a while?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Linda, please." But she had already hung up. Tears of frustration and hurt welled up in my eyes. I wanted to march back into that house and throw everyone out. But then I thought of Tommy, innocent in all this, and Jack, who would be devastated if I caused a scene with his family. With shaking hands, I scrolled through my contacts and called Sarah's husband, Mark. "Rachel?" Mark's voice was surprised. "What's up?" I took a deep breath and explained everything that had happened. Mark listened in stunned silence. "I had no idea," he said when I finished. Rachel, I'm so sorry. I didn't even know Sarah was planning to have the party at your place. I'm stuck at work, but I'll be there in about 3 hours. Can you hang tight until then? I agreed, not knowing what else to do. Feeling lost and betrayed, I drove to a nearby cafe. As I sat there, nursing a coffee I couldn't taste, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had my attempt at building bridges turned into this nightmare? After what felt like an eternity, Mark's car pulled into the cafe parking lot. We drove up to my house in silence and walked in without knocking. The scene that greeted us was surreal. My living room was full of people I didn't recognize, all dressed to the nines. In the center of it all was Sarah, holding court like a queen at her coronation. Mark's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. What the hell is going on here? The room fell silent. Sarah's head whipped around, her face draining of color when she saw us. She tried to pull Mark aside, her voice low and urgent. Please, not in front of everyone. I can explain everything. But Mark wasn't having it. No, Sarah, I want answers now. Under the weight of Mark's glare and the curious stares of the guests, Sarah finally cracked. Fine, she hissed. I invited Jason and his parents, okay? She gestured to a smug-looking man in an expensive suit. They're very influential, and they promised to help me with my business venture. I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Mark's face reddened. So you used our son's birthday as a networking event? And what about my parents? Sarah's next words made my blood run cold. Your parents? Please. They're not exactly the kind of people who can help us get ahead. What was the point of inviting them? A tense silence fell over the room. Then, to my horror, Jason, Sarah's ex, raised his champagne glass in a mocking toast. No hard feelings, Mark, he said with a smirk. That was the last straw. Mark lunged at Jason, and suddenly my carefully planned party devolved into chaos. People were shouting, glasses were breaking, and in the middle of it all was Tommy, looking confused and scared. The party dissolved quickly after that. Guests hurried out, muttering apologies and avoiding eye contact. But Sarah wasn't done. Instead of apologizing to Mark or me, she cornered Jason and his parents, groveling and making excuses. I'm so sorry about this, she simpered. My husband doesn't understand how important networking is. I hope this hasn't ruined our chances of working together. As the last of the guests trickled out, I was left standing in my wrecked living room, surrounded by the ruins of the party I'd worked so hard to plan. Mark was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, while Sarah continued to make excuses. Tommy had retreated to a corner, clutching the gift I'd given him earlier, looking lost and confused. When Jack finally returned from his trip, I broke down and told him everything. He pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time since the party, I felt safe. I promise you, he whispered, I won't let her treat you like this ever again. You have my full support. True to his word, Jack called Sarah that very evening. I could hear his raised voice from the other room, words like disrespectful and inexcusable cutting through the air. When he hung up, he looked drained but resolute. She won't be bothering us again anytime soon, he assured me. But the drama was far from over. Over the next few weeks, we heard through the family grapevine that Sarah and Mark's marriage was imploding. Apparently, Mark's suspicions about Sarah's relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Jason, had reached a boiling point. One evening, Mark called us, sounding desperate. I found messages, he said, his voice cracking. Hundreds of them, between Sarah and Jason. They'd been in constant contact before and after the party. My heart sank for Mark. I'm so sorry, I said, not knowing what else to offer. That's not all, Mark continued. I did a paternity test on Tommy. I had to know. The situation was spiraling out of control. To make matters worse, Jack's parents seemed to have taken Sarah's side in all of this. One afternoon, I received a scathing call from Linda, my mother-in-law. How dare you turn my children against each other, she screeched into the phone. You've torn this family apart with your selfish behavior. I was stunned. Linda, I didn't do anything. Sarah. Don't you dare blame Sarah, she interrupted. She was just trying to better herself and her family. You're nothing but a self-centered homewrecker. Then came the day Mark received the paternity test results. He showed up at our doorstep, looking shell-shocked. Tommy's mine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's really mine. While this should have been a relief, it only seemed to complicate matters further. When Sarah found out about the test, she exploded. How dare you question my fidelity, she shrieked at Mark during a confrontation we unfortunately witnessed. Everything I've done has been for us, for our family. Mark scoffed. Sneaking around with your ex is for our family? You don't understand, she yelled back. Jason's mother has connections. I was trying to build a network, to create opportunities for us. But you, she pointed an accusing finger at Mark, you're too much of a loser to see the bigger picture. The argument escalated, with Sarah hurling insults and accusations. And then, in a move that left us all stunned, Sarah stormed out. She returned an hour later with packed bags, Tommy clutching her hand. I'm done, she announced coldly. I'm going to build my empire, with or without you. You can keep your precious paternity test. I'll be back for Tommy when I'm successful. With that, she walked out, leaving a devastated Mark and a confused Tommy behind. Jack and I exchanged a look, silently agreeing that our lives had just become infinitely more complicated. We had chosen our side in this family war, and there was no going back now. The following months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Jack and I found ourselves thrust into the role of impromptu babysitters, often looking after Tommy while Mark dealt with lawyers and court appearances. I couldn't help but feel a gnawing guilt. If I hadn't interrupted that party, would any of this have happened? One evening, as we were putting Tommy to bed after a long day of distracting him with games and stories, I confessed my feelings to Jack. I can't help thinking this is all my fault, I whispered, fighting back tears. Jack pulled me close, his voice firm but gentle. Rachel, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Sarah's always been like this, spoiled, selfish, unable to see or respect boundaries. You were just trying to be kind. She's the one who took advantage of that kindness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of legal battles, the divorce was finalized. Mark was awarded full custody of Tommy, with Sarah granted limited visitation rights. It felt like we could all finally breathe again. Then, to our surprise and joy, I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't an easy pregnancy, my old spinal injury from the plane accident made things complicated. I had to wear a supportive corset constantly, and there were days when the pain was almost unbearable. But every time I felt the baby move, every time I saw the grainy image on the ultrasound screen, I knew it was worth it. Jack was over the moon, doting on me hand and foot. We thought we'd finally put the drama behind us. We were wrong. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. The doorbell rang, and Jack went to answer it. I heard his sharp intake of breath before I saw her. Sarah, standing on our doorstep, looking nothing like the polished, ambitious woman who'd stormed out of our lives years ago. I need to talk to Mark, she said, her voice hoarse. Please. Jack called Mark, who arrived within minutes, his face a mask of wary confusion. Sarah launched into her story as soon as he walked in. I've made a horrible mistake, she said, her eyes brimming with tears. The business, it all fell apart. Jason, he used me. When the project failed, he just left. I need help. They're demanding repayment. I thought maybe you could be a guarantor for a loan. The room fell silent. Tommy had stopped playing, watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. Mark took a deep breath. No, Sarah, he said finally. I won't be your guarantor, and I won't take you back. You made your choice years ago. Sarah's face crumpled. But what about Tommy? Don't you want him to have his mother back? Mark's voice was steel. Tommy has been just fine without you. We've moved on, Sarah. I think you should too. Just when we thought the dust had settled, Sarah made her grand reappearance. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was enjoying a rare moment of peace, sipping herbal tea on the porch, my very pregnant belly making even this simple task a bit of a challenge. The sound of tires screeching broke the tranquility. Sarah burst out of her car, her face a mask of desperation and anger. "Jack," she screamed, storming up our walkway. "I need to talk to you." Jack appeared at the door, his face hardening at the sight of his sister. "Sarah, you need to leave, now." But Sarah was beyond reason. She pointed an accusing finger at me. "This is all her fault. If she hadn't come into our lives, none of this would have happened." I felt a familiar knot of guilt forming in my stomach, but Jack's firm voice cut through my doubts. "That's enough, Sarah," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Rachel has done nothing but support this family, even when you tried to tear it apart. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. If you come here again, I'll call the police." For a moment, I thought Sarah might lunge at us. Instead, she spun on her heel and marched back to her car. As she peeled away, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The next morning, we woke to find Sarah had set up a tent on our front lawn. She'd fashioned a crude sign, "Family abandonment in progress, shame on you." "This is ridiculous," Jack muttered, reaching for his phone. True to his word, he called the police. The officers were sympathetic, but explained that as long as Sarah remained on public property, there wasn't much they could do. They did, however, issue her a warning about harassment. This standoff continued for days. Sarah would shout at us whenever we left the house, beg Jack to help her when he came home from work, and tried to guilt-trip me about stealing her family. Finally, after a week of this nightmare, we got a call from Linda. "I've convinced Sarah to come home," she said, her voice tired. "I'm sorry for everything. I see now that she needs help, not enabling." True to Linda's word, Sarah packed up her tent that evening. As she drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But the peace was short-lived. Jack found me in the nursery later that night, absently folding and refolding onesies. "Ratch," he said gently, "I've been thinking. Maybe we should sell the house. Move somewhere Sarah doesn't know about. Somewhere we can raise our baby in peace." The next few months were a whirlwind of real estate agents, packing boxes, and doctor's appointments. We found a smaller house in a quiet neighborhood across town, right next to a good school and a public library. It was perfect. Epilogue. It's been 5 years since we moved. Lily, our daughter, is a happy, healthy kindergartner, and Tommy, now a teenager, is a frequent visitor and doting cousin. Mark has found happiness with a kind woman who loves Tommy like her own. We hear from Linda occasionally. She tells us Sarah is working 2 jobs to pay off her debts and seems to be getting her life together. Part of me hopes that one day, she'll be ready to be a part of our lives again. But for now, we're content. I'm Victoria, and I guess you could say I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. Not that we were filthy rich or anything, but my childhood was pretty damn good. Mom and Dad? They were like something out of a rom-com, always holding hands, stealing kisses when they thought I wasn't looking. We lived in this cozy little house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but it was home. Every weekend was like a mini adventure. Dad would pack us all into our beat-up station wagon, and off we'd go. Sometimes it was a hike in the nearby state park, other times a trip to the local cinema to catch the latest blockbuster. School was, well, school. I wasn't the popular kid, but I wasn't the outcast either. Just your average student trying to navigate the minefield of adolescence. I had a small group of friends, real friends, not those fake ones who only hang around when it's convenient. High school flew by in a blur of exams, awkward school dances, and late-night study sessions fueled by too much caffeine and junk food. Before I knew it, graduation was looming on the horizon. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Mom and Dad, a stack of college brochures spread out in front of us. "So, Vicky," Dad said, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, "any idea what you want to do with your life?" I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I'd been both dreading and looking forward to. "I want to be a cardiologist," I blurted out. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those looks that parents seem to perfect, a whole conversation without a single word. "All right," Dad finally said. "If this is what you really want, we'll make it happen." Getting into med school was just the beginning. The next 4 years were even more intense than undergrad. There were times I thought my brain might explode from all the information I was trying to cram into it. But there were amazing moments too. The first time I successfully drew blood from a patient, after a few embarrassing misses. The day I correctly diagnosed a heart murmur during rounds. The moment I realized that all this hard work was actually turning me into a doctor. Graduation day was surreal. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I saw my parents in the audience. Mom was crying, of course, and even Dad looked misty-eyed. As we left the auditorium, Dad threw his arm around my shoulders. "So, Dr. Adams," he said with a grin, "what's next?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the future on my shoulders. "Now," I said, "I become a cardiologist." Little did I know, my journey was far from over. In fact, the real challenges were just beginning. Fresh out of med school, I dove headfirst into my career at a private clinic in the city. The hours were long and grueling, but I loved every minute of it. I was finally doing what I'd dreamed of for so long, helping people, saving lives. As the months flew by, my hard work started to pay off. My bank account grew, and for the first time in my life, I had more money than I knew what to do with. On a whim, I walked into a car dealership one day and drove out in a sleek new sedan. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, bought with my own hard-earned money. A few months later, I signed the mortgage papers on a spacious apartment in a nice part of town. As I stood in the empty living room, keys in hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I was living the dream I'd worked so hard for. With the holidays approaching, I decided to take a few days off to visit my parents. I hadn't seen them in months, and I was excited to share my success with them. But as soon as I walked through the door of my childhood home, I knew something was off. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mom and Dad were in the same room, but they might as well have been on different planets. The warm, loving atmosphere I remembered was gone, replaced by a cold, uncomfortable silence. At dinner, the tension was palpable. Mom and Dad barely looked at each other, let alone spoke. I tried to fill the silence with stories about work, but my words fell flat in the frosty air between them. Later that night, I cornered Mom in the kitchen while she was doing the dishes. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "You and Dad, you're acting like strangers." Mom's hand stilled in the soapy water. She didn't turn around, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "It's nothing, honey," she said, her voice tight. "People change, that's all. Your father and I, we're just different people now." But I knew my mother. I could hear the pain behind her words. "Mom, please, tell me the truth." She sighed, finally turning to face me. The sadness in her eyes broke my heart. "Your father, he got a promotion at work a few months ago. With it came a personal assistant, a young woman." My stomach dropped. "Mom, are you saying?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "He's been staying late at the office, more and more. I think she might be his mistress." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My dad, the man I'd idolized my whole life, cheating on my mom? It didn't seem possible. "I'm going to talk to him," I said, anger rising in my chest. "How dare he do this to you?" "No, Victoria," Mom said, grabbing my arm. "I've already decided. I'm going to file for divorce. I've talked to a lawyer, everything's planned out." I stared at her in shock. "Divorce? But can't you work it out?" She smiled sadly. "Some things can't be fixed, sweetheart. And I don't want you to get caught in the middle of this. I have no hard feelings towards your father, and I don't want you to either. These things, they happen in life. We need to be understanding. I couldn't believe how calm she was being about all this. If it were me, I'd be furious, devastated. But here was my mom, handling it all with grace and dignity. The divorce hit like a hurricane, leaving destruction in its wake. Mom, bless her heart, didn't go down without a fight. She demanded half of everything and extra compensation for Dad's infidelity. To his credit, Dad didn't argue. He paid up without a fuss. But the real kicker? Before the ink was dry on the divorce papers, Dad married his assistant. His mistress. My new stepmother. I nearly choked when I saw her. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. 22 years younger than Dad, for crying out loud. She was closer to being my friend than my stepmother. Not that I wanted anything to do with her. I kept my distance, limiting my interactions with Dad and his child bride to bare necessities. It hurt to see him with her, to see how quickly he'd moved on while Mom was still picking up the pieces. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. I got an offer to work at a prestigious clinic in another city. 2 years, great pay, and a chance to study under Dr. Harriet Chen, one of the most renowned cardiologists in the country. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. I called Mom as soon as I got the news. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she exclaimed, genuine joy in her voice. "You have to take it. This could be huge for your career." Her enthusiasm was infectious. For the first time in months, I felt excitement bubbling up inside me. This was my chance for a fresh start, away from all the drama. Word of my impending move must have spread because Dad called me the next day. "Vicky," he said, his voice hesitant, "I heard you're moving." "Yeah, Dad. Got a great job offer in." He cut me off. "Listen, I need to ask you something. It's a bit awkward. Things at work, they're not great. My income's taken a hit. I was wondering, could Sarah and I use your apartment while you're gone? And maybe, borrow your car?" I was speechless. After everything that had happened, he had the nerve to ask this? "I don't know, Dad. I need to think about it." I hung up, my mind whirling. Part of me wanted to tell him to get lost. But another part, he was still my dad. I called Mom, dreading her reaction. To my surprise, she was calm. "It's your apartment, your car, Victoria," she said. "You're an adult. You get to decide what to do with your things. I won't be offended, whatever you choose." Her maturity made me feel small and petty. After a sleepless night, I called Dad and agreed. The day I handed over the keys was surreal. Dad looked sheepish, but Sarah, she had this smug look that made my skin crawl. As I handed Dad the keys, Sarah piped up. "Well, isn't this nice?" The keys finally returning to their rightful owner. She nodded at Dad with a simpering smile. I stared at her, then at Dad, confusion and anger bubbling up inside me. Dad quickly pulled me aside. "Vicky, honey," he whispered, "I need you to play along. I may have told Sarah that the apartment and car are mine. That I've just been letting you use them." I gaped at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. This man, who I'd admired my whole life, was asking me to lie. To pretend I hadn't worked my ass off for everything I owned. In that moment, something inside me broke. The last shred of respect I had for my father vanished. I looked at him, this stranger wearing my dad's face, and made a decision. Without a word, I turned and walked out of my own apartment. 2 days later, I was on a plane to my new life in a new city. As the plane took off, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For 2 years, I wouldn't have to deal with any of this drama. I could focus on my work, on becoming the best doctor I could be. The 2 years in the new city flew by like a dream. I kept in touch with Mom regularly, our weekly Skype calls a lifeline to home. She looked better each time, the sparkle returning to her eyes as she built her new life. Dad, on the other hand, was a different story. Our calls were audio only. He claimed he couldn't figure out all this newfangled video stuff. I didn't push it. Hearing his voice was hard enough. I wasn't sure I could handle seeing him with his new wife. When my contract ended, I returned to my old city with mixed feelings. I was excited to start back at my old clinic, but dreading the family drama I'd left behind. The day I went to reclaim my apartment, I stood outside the familiar door, key in hand, heart pounding. But when I tried to unlock it, the key wouldn't turn. Frowning, I knocked loudly. The door swung open, revealing Sarah's annoyed face. "Oh," she said flatly. "It's you." I pushed past her into the apartment and froze, my jaw dropping. The place was unrecognizable. Gone were my tasteful, muted colors, replaced by garish bright hues that hurt my eyes. My carefully chosen furniture had vanished, switched out for modern pieces that clashed horribly with the overall design. But the real shock came when I stepped into what used to be my bedroom. It had been transformed into a nursery, complete with a crib and changing table. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, whirling to face Sarah. She smirked, resting a hand on her very pregnant belly. "We needed to make some changes. This is our home, after all." "Your home?" I sputtered. "This is my apartment." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "No, this is your father's apartment. He's just been letting you stay here out of the kindness of his heart. And now, as his wife, I'm the lady of the house." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell her the truth, but something made me hesitate. The sight of her swollen belly cooled my anger. I couldn't bring myself to stress out a pregnant woman, no matter how infuriating she was. I spent the next few hours seething, pacing the garishly redecorated living room. When Dad finally walked through the door, I pounced. "Dad, we need to talk. Now." He nodded, looking tired. "I know, Vicky, let's step outside." Once we were alone, I let loose. "What the hell, Dad? You let her completely trash my apartment? And what's this bullshit about it being your place?" He held up his hands placatingly. I know. It's complicated, sweetie." I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. "Things at work, they're not good. If Sarah knew we were living off your charity. Please, Vicky, don't kick us out. Not with the baby coming." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream and rage and throw them both out on their ears. But looking at my father, this broken, pleading version of the strong man I once knew, I couldn't do it. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "We'll figure something out." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you, sweetheart. Oh, and there's one more thing." I braced myself. "What?" "I may have given Sarah your car. When I found out about the baby, I wanted to do something nice for her. I'll pay you back, I promise." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "It's fine, Dad. The clinic's not far, I can walk." He kissed my hand, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "You're an angel, Vicky. We'll make this work, you'll see." As I watched him go back inside, I tried to convince myself this could work. I'd be at the clinic most of the time anyway. Maybe I could even learn to get along with Sarah. I threw myself into work with renewed vigor. The clinic became my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the tension at home. I'd leave before dawn and return long after dark, tiptoeing through the apartment to avoid waking Sarah or the newborn baby. 2 months into this routine, fate threw me a lifeline. I was grabbing a quick coffee at my favorite cafe when I quite literally bumped into him. Tall, with kind eyes and a crooked smile, Jake was charming from the moment he helped me mop up my spilled latte. "I'm so sorry," he said, handing me a wad of napkins. "Can I buy you a replacement?" One coffee turned into dinner, which turned into more dates. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other regularly. For the first time in months, I felt light, happy. Jake was funny, smart, and best of all, completely removed from my family drama. I started spending more and more time at his place, relishing the peace and normalcy. It was a blissful respite from the chaos at home. but reality has a way of intruding. One evening, I arrived home to find Sarah waiting for me, her face like thunder. "Where have you been?" she demanded, bouncing a fussy baby on her hip. I blinked, taken aback by her tone. "At work, then out." "Why?" She thrust a mop at me. "This place is a mess. Your father can't afford a housekeeper, so you need to pull your weight around here. I'm busy with the baby." Anger flared in my chest. "I'm not your maid, Sarah. I work 60-hour weeks saving lives. I'm not spending my free time cleaning up after you." Her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little freeloader. Living off your father's generosity and you can't even help out? Maybe we should kick you out, see how you like that." I couldn't help it, I laughed. The sheer audacity of her threat was almost impressive. "Good luck with that," I said, turning away. For the next few days, I ignored Sarah's pointed looks and passive-aggressive comments about the state of the apartment. I focused on work and on Jake, counting the hours until I could escape to his place. Then, one afternoon, my world imploded. My phone rang, it was Jake. "Hey, you," I answered, smiling. "I was just thinking about you." "It's over," he cut me off, his voice cold. I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. "What? Jake, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Victoria. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I can't believe I fell for your act." "Jake, I honestly have no idea." "Save it," he snapped. "We're done." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, stunned. What the hell had just happened? Seconds later, a message popped up. It was from Jake, a photo. My heart stopped as I opened it. It was me, locked in a passionate kiss with a man who definitely wasn't Jake. Except, it wasn't me. The woman in the photo looked like me, but something was off. The hair wasn't quite right, the posture, not quite mine. Realization dawned, along with a wave of fury. Sarah. This had Sarah written all over it. I tried calling Jake back, desperate to explain, but my calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages bounced back, undelivered. He'd blocked me. I stormed into the apartment, fury radiating from every pore. Sarah sat on the couch, a smug smile playing on her lips. She knew exactly what she'd done. "You," I snarled, advancing on her. "What the hell have you done?" Sarah's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "It was easy, really. A little Photoshop here, a few messages there. You'd be surprised what people will believe when they're jealous." The casual way she admitted to destroying my relationship made my blood boil. "You fabricated that photo? And what messages?" "Oh, just a few posts on social media about how you're dating multiple men, looking for someone richer than your boyfriend. You know, the usual gold digger stuff." I was speechless with rage. How could someone be so callous, so cruel? Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Now listen here, princess. You're going to start pulling your weight around here. Clean the house, do the laundry, take care of the baby when I need a break. Or else." "Or else what?" I spat. "Or else I'll make sure your daddy knows what an ungrateful brat you are. He'll kick you out so fast your head will spin." That was it. The final straw. I threw my head back and laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You really don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "This is MY apartment. I bought it with MY money. You're the ones who'll be out on the street if you don't apologize and help me fix things with Jake." Sarah's face contorted with rage. She opened her mouth to retort, but just then, the front door opened. Dad walked in, looking tired and confused at the tableau before him. Sarah immediately launched into a tirade. "John, you won't believe what your daughter just said. She's threatening to kick us out. After everything we've done for her. She's an ungrateful, selfish bitch and I want her gone." Dad's eyes met mine, pleading. He leaned in close, whispering, "Vicky, please. Just go along with it. Move out for a while. We'll sort this out later." I stared at him in disbelief. My own father, asking me to leave my own home. Something snapped inside me. No, I said, my voice steady and cold. I'm done playing along. This is my apartment. You two have until tonight to get out, or I'm calling the police and having you removed. Dad's face darkened. After everything I've done for you? I paid for your education. Your fancy medical degree. And I've more than repaid that by letting you live here rent-free and use my car, I shot back. We're even. Now get out. Sarah was screaming obscenities, Dad was trying to reason with me, but I stood firm. I watched in stony silence as they packed their things, Sarah alternating between cursing me and sobbing dramatically. As they walked out the door, Dad turned to me one last time. You'll regret this, Victoria. Mark my words. The silence in my newly reclaimed apartment was deafening. As I sat there, surrounded by the garish remnants of Sarah's decorating spree, I felt a sudden surge of determination. No more sacrifices. No more adjusting my life to accommodate others' lies and manipulations. It was time to take control. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew I could always count on, my mom. Mom, I said, my voice cracking. I need to talk to you. I poured out everything, the lies, the manipulation, the final confrontation. Mom listened patiently, her calm presence a balm to my frayed nerves. Oh, honey, she said when I finished. I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself. You did the right thing. Her words were like a warm embrace. Thanks, Mom, but I've lost Jake. Sarah ruined everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Maybe not. Give me Jake's number. Mom, what are you? Trust me, sweetheart. I've got this. Bewildered but hopeful, I gave her the number. The next day, I received a text from Mom asking me to meet her at our favorite cafe. When I arrived, my heart nearly stopped. There, sitting across from my mother, was Jake. Mom waved me over, a mischievous glint in her eye. Sit down, Victoria. Jake and I were just having a lovely chat. Over the next hour, Mom laid out the whole sordid tale, Sarah's lies, Dad's deceptions, all of it. Jake listened, his face a mix of shock, anger, and shame. When Mom finished, Jake turned to me, his eyes brimming with remorse. Victoria, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you, should have given you a chance to explain. I wanted to forgive him, but the hurt was still raw. You believed the worst of me so easily, Jake. How can I trust you won't do it again? To my utter shock, Jake slid out of his chair and dropped to one knee in the middle of the busy cafe. Victoria Adams, I love you. I was an idiot, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. Please, forgive me? The cafe had gone silent, all eyes on us. I felt a blush creeping up my neck, but looking into Jake's earnest eyes, I found my anger melting away. Oh, get up, you big idiot, I said, tugging him to his feet. Of course I forgive you. The cafe erupted in applause as Jake swept me into a kiss. Mom wiped away a tear, beaming at us both. Life has a funny way of working out. A couple of months later, we heard through the grapevine that Sarah had run off with a younger man, leaving Dad and the baby behind. She'd finally realized that Dad had no money or property to his name. Dad, in his desperation, tried to reconcile with Mom, but she refused him. 3 years passed in a whirlwind of love, laughter, and career success. When Jake proposed, properly this time on a moonlit beach, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Our wedding day was perfect. Mom walked me down the aisle, radiant with joy. As I exchanged vows with Jake, I caught sight of an empty seat in the back, the one reserved for Dad. He hadn't come. A pang of sadness hit me, but as I looked back at Jake, at Mom, at all the people who truly loved and supported me, I realized I had everything I needed.